last
hype.
day together.
That's what that means, Alexandra. I'm going to have to get hype because if it's our potentially our last day, I can't be here just being like, "Oh, everybody, look at this chess move. You see the pawn on e4, and now you see the pawn on c5, and now you see the knight on f3." No, I gotta get hype because if it's our last day together, we have all these five heads in the chat, and well, I think it's not a goodbye. It would be a see you later, if anything.
Yeah, that's fair. You guys are right. If Dubov wins, it's not the last day. That's why I said it might be. It might be. So Robert, we always talk about your predictions going into the match. What are the chances that we have a third date tomorrow, aka Dubov makes it?
Well, I think that Hikaru is the favorite within any of these mini matches. Within
Mm-hmm.
the 4 game series, Hikaru is the favorite. He is the stronger rapid player of the two, especially right now and in the online format. That said, I do think the duo has a good chance no matter what, because not necessarily to win the overall match, but to make it to tomorrow, absolutely, why not? He's the underdog, but he's the former world rapid champion. He's a super talented player, and as you've correctly pointed out, if he can get the first victory of the two in this mini match, that already puts the odds in his favor. So I think he has a good chance, but Hikaru is the favorite.
And speaking of, I see that their game did get started, so I am watching now. We have the live board as always. Hikaru today is starting off with the white pieces. As usual, the strategy for black is to, at least try to get a draw here, because then you have 2 out of 3 games following with the white pieces here. We got a Sicilian with c3, which is kind of a sideline. What's your take on Hikaru's opening here?
I grew up playing this Sicilian from the white side, and I didn't always get very good positions. But I do trust Hikaru Nakamura to play better than I did as a kid and challenging this setup. And when you see this position, you're like, wait, didn't black just get a ton of space? This pawn is on c4. This pawn is on d5. And right now, Hikaru already has a choice. Do I take en passant? Because the pawn went from d7 to d5 in one turn, which means I can capture through it just on this turn. And if you take on d6, now we lose the symmetrical pawn structure when black takes with the queen. And so we have an advanced pawn on c4 for black, which is either a great pawn or a potential target.
That's true. As usual in chess, things can be both weak and strong at the same time, usually depending at what stage in the position. So, for example, in an opening, a pawn that is very push forward can be considered an advantage because you have more space. But if you get into the endgame and it's difficult to protect this pawn, then it can actually turn into a weakness.
That's exactly right. The knight on b6, it does protect the pawn, but sometimes you need a second protector, and it's not as easy to get that piece. So we do see en passant and queen takes d6. And now I think white should just castle. You're ready to get your king safe, and there it is. So,
And you predicted the move, Hess. Good job. And
I have a little bit of experience in this opening.
so Hikaru plays queen e2. That's an interesting move considering that he hasn't developed any of his queen side. What do you think about taking the queen out so early before you've developed any of your minor pieces?
Yeah, it does feel a bit weird, especially because if you look at black's queen side, all of those pieces are developed. So we sort of have different for different strategies on the opposite flanks. Black's king side still left undeveloped. White's king, castle, that whole side of the board is out and free. But why queen e2 is played is to immediately apply pressure on the c4 pawn. And also, perhaps that rook wants to slide to d1 before you touch your d pawn. You may want to play d3 and challenge this pawn c4 directly. But if your rook's on d1, then you're putting some pressure on your opponent's queen.
Fair enough. So it's still a pretty slow development strategy, though. And the pawn on c4, it seems like you're thinking about it more as a strength and a weakness since you're so tempted to try to trade it off as white.
Yeah, I mean, if I play d3, then it's trading it off, but also freeing my queenside pieces. You're pointing out that my pieces are not developed. A good way to do that is by pushing the d pawn, getting the bishop out. Another idea will be to play for knight a3, or for pawn to b3. That way we can either attack the pawn directly or try to trade it on b3, such that I can push my d pawn without any repercussions. And wow, castling queenside is not a decision I expected.
No, it's very bold because, as we said, Dubov should be pretty happy with a draw in the first game with the black pieces. castling queenside is very committal. He's going to go for an aggressive game, and he's castling queenside when he has a pawn on c4 instead of c7, so his king is a little bit weaker. And you can even see that the eval bar, which let me make sure I have a depth that is respectable. Yeah, it's on at least 22. So really just jumped to liking White's position more here. I mean, if this goes wrong and he loses the first game, it's almost over for him.
Well, he does have the black pieces. You can rebound with the white piece in the next game, but I agree with you that Hikaru Nakamura with the lead is a scary proposition for anybody. And it just was, I mean, it just doesn't feel right to castle queenside in this position. I understand you're down in the match. You probably want to spice things up, but your king is potentially vulnerable there. The c4 pawn already a target. And actually, what does black do right now? Because if you play queen to d5, that would be the way I would try to defend this pawn. Then I invite a move like bishop e4 in with a tempo, centralizing my bishop, hitting your queen and behind it the knight, protecting my knight on f3 so you can't capture there and ruin my pawn structure. Kind of just like a free developing move that is advantageous for white.
Yeah, that is true. So maybe he doesn't want to develop that way. But then the question is, what can he do? Because he doesn't want to retreat his bishop to, say, e6. That's a very passive move. Okay, so instead he plays queen e6. He's offering up the queen trade, and if the queens do get traded off the board, then he has less problems to worry about on his king side. He is still ahead in development. Unfortunately, though, that pawn on c4 is still going to be a target.
And it's that pawn, and after queen takes e6, you should probably take with your bishop on e6 so you don't ruin your pawn structure. And then knight g5 hits that bishop on e6, and I'm actually threatening to take your pawn on h7, if I'm not mistaken. I know sometimes your pieces get trapped on h7, you go full Bobby Fischer, Boris Spassky, but that pawn on h7 may be capturable.
Interesting. And I think one of the reasons why it may be capturable is because often you get worried that your knight has no escape square, but here you could always take on f8 and get rid of the bishop.
And I'm thinking that after, say, bishop d5, knight h7, rook h7, and then I try to sacrifice my rook for your knight, and then get the bishop trapped there. It may trap the bishop, and I should be more concerned about it, but not my pieces. So this sort of dynamic where the bishop might be lost, but you get a second pawn. So it's a rook and two pawns for two minor pieces. I don't know how to weigh it exactly, but I think it's a really interesting imbalance.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is very much a Dubov opening style. Do you think that he's still in preparation here, or that maybe he has already deviated?
Definitely out of preparation, and as we were, go forward to the live position, I think Hikaru also is just they're both figuring it out at the board, because after the queen trade and all the stuff, it seems like Dubov can say the worst is behind me, my king is now safe, and they're actually about to see a bunch of trades.
All right. Oh, sorry, I didn't update the live board, so let me catch up with it. So after queen e6, we saw queen takes e6, bishop takes e6. This is what we expected. Instead of the knight g5 move, maybe Hikaru was afraid of getting his bishop trapped on h7 if he ever takes it, and if that's the case, then knight g5 doesn't make as much sense anymore. b3, so he did find the c4 pawn annoying, mostly because it's hard for him to develop his pieces without moving either of the two pawns. Bishop d5, putting pressure, threatening to potentially double up White's pawns here. Hikaru says, I don't mind. I would rather take your bishops. If you decide to trade off my knight, I'll get the pair of bishops here. Captured a pawn. Dubov takes back with the knight. Knight takes, bishop takes. Rook is under attack, so he just moves it over one square, also putting pressure on e7. And now we are caught up to the current board.
And this dynamic now, you see there's a difference in pawn structure for both sides, right? White has a C and a D pawn, and black has a B and an E pawn. So the E pawn challenges the D pawn, the B pawn challenges the C pawn for black. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. Black is about to complete development with the bishop on f8 and then get the rook on h8 into the game. But like Alexandra, when you see a pawn structure like this, and it's just very different, what do you make of it?
It's certainly an asymmetrical position here with the pawn structure, as you just pointed out. And I think that I do prefer Dubov's pawn structure in the sense that he has no weaknesses. We have an isolated pawn on a2, and even the c and d pawn feel like they could be a little bit weak. Wow, I love Dubov's idea here. He's basically arguing that these two connected pawns might be a little bit of a thorn in Hikaru's position, because if bishop takes, rook takes, then he is keeping the pawn on d2 from moving, and the bishop on c1 is stuck protecting it.
Yeah, and once you put your piece in front of that pawn, it can't move, of course. So, kind of planting that rook there, and you're freeing up the remaining light squares. Because if you look at White's pawn structure, just more generally, these pawns are on dark squares, which means that they attack dark squares, which means that the light squares are some that you'd like to get into, and that's why Dubov would like to remove the bishops. It's not the end of the world for Hikaru to do so, but I completely understand his decision to say immediately, let's trade off these pieces here and give me the light squares as a future prospect.
Right. So, in terms of options here, there's of course bishop takes d3. Can he try just moving his bishop away? Let's say bishop b3 or bishop a4. Is there any advantage for Hikaru to try to keep his light squared bishop?
There is, but either move has a good response from black. If you play bishop to b3, I see you're attacking my pawn on f7 and want to control the light squares, so I'll probably just play pawn e6 and close it off. And it's not a bad thing that's just happened for either side. It's just black will finish development. Your bishop on b3 looking a bit limited there, and my bishop on d3 is black is going to sit there for a long while, and you'll have to figure out how to deal with it.
All right, and if bishop a4?
At bishop a4, then I'm going to change my plan because I know you want to take my knight on c6 and then put your knight into e5. So I will probably play pawn f6 in that case. I don't want to commit to too much on the queen side. I thought about pawn b5 to stop your bishop from taking my knight, but I think it maybe exposes my queen side to a counter attack at some point. So f6 just says you're not getting your knight to e5. I will probably put my own pawn on e5 from black's point of view, and I'm gaining space, finishing my development. My rook on d8 is particularly happy, and if I do get pawn to e5, your rook on e1 loses some of its mobility.
That's actually a really nice explanation. So we looked at the option. The bishop probably has to take in that case because there's no way to defend it. So you either accept the trade, you move away, or you defend the piece. So we've gone through those. So I think we're going to expect bishop takes d3 here. And in terms of the time situation, I mean, Hikaru is still up on, oh, we have seen progress. Okay, updating the live board, sorry. So he did take rook takes d3 and rook e3. So he instantly challenges the rook on d3. He doesn't want the rook to stay stuck there and never allow the pawn to move forward. And Dubov decides to keep his rook on the board, so he plays rook d7. Can you talk a little bit about his decision to not trade rooks here?
Yes, so rook takes e3 would have been met by f pawn takes e3. And now suddenly white has this phalanx of pawns. And it's not like this is a bad position for black, but then white will play d4, king to f2 directly, bringing the king towards the center. And forward is good in an endgame where you don't need to protect the king, but it can be used as an aggressive piece. So actually kind of connecting white's pawn structure makes it feel nice and tight, nice and safe. Whereas in the game, we might see after rook to d7. I know it's a retreating move. They may look, oh, is black scared about something? No. What black wants to do is say, if white plays pawn to d4, you still look at these light squares on the queen side and have to be somewhat concerned for the prospects in the long term for white, because the pawn on c3 would be a backwards pawn and the light squares would be blacks for the taking. So bishop a3 chosen instead by Hikaru, and I think e6 here, trading off the bishops. You just have this long-term slight advantage for black.
So you have a long-term slight advantage for black. And what is that based on? So let's say the bishops get traded off.
Okay. And if we trade those bishops, it's really about just the kind of the awkwardness of white's pawns. The pawn d2 requiring defense of the knight on f3. And if you push that pawn to d4, your c3 pawn suddenly becomes weaker. And it seems just more evident that some of white's pawns will be backward or potentially attacked, whereas black's pawns are so they're all together. Can't even put pressure on them, and if you do put pressure on one of them, I can just move it and save it. So I just feel like the plans are easier for black, and white has to stay a little bit more protective of the pawns.
And I like that there's basically one key difference here because we have equal material, two rooks, a knight, and the biggest difference is just the pawn structure, and even something so slight is already an advantage that Dubov would be very happy with. But we do have takeoff. We have e5 and bishop takes f8, so the more aggressive of the two options between e6 and e5. But one thing about e5 makes me think that if a pawn is ever on d4, it's more likely for Hikaru to be able to trade off his pawn, but at the same time, it would result in an isolated pawn. Say it wasn't currently a free pawn because there's a rook and a knight attacking, but in the long term. So I feel like that move is cementing in the weakness even more.
It is, and I actually somewhat regret not suggesting e5 first. But e5 is
He
a square
beat
that
you to it, Robert.
he beat me to it, and the problem is, from my point of view, is that the pawn is under attack 2 times. But if white is going to steal that pawn e5, we just see a trade of knights in the e5 square, and then black goes rook takes d2, and there now it's very clear that black's rook is very active. White's pawn structure is worse because the split pawns on the queen side. So these little slight advantages will build up in an endgame with fewer pieces remaining.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if this is enough of an advantage for Dubov to win the game, but at least if anybody has winning chances, it's him. He's with the black pieces, so he should be very, very happy with that.
Honestly, that's exactly how Hikaru beat him in the first game yesterday. He
Right.
had this slight advantage. Dubov got into time trouble. Hikaru was able to nurse that advantage into a full point when Dubov erred. So I think that that kind of position would be one that's very dangerous. Hikaru. The best thing that Hikaru is doing right now is keeping a good time management. He has just under 10 minutes, and in this position, which is better for Black, at the very least, he has plenty of time to figure out which pathway do I want to go down? Do I want to keep even material, but be more passive? Or do I want to even sacrifice a pawn to get into a rook endgame where I feel like we're just about to be in theoretically drawn waters?
And I'm curious what chat thinks of this position. So if you guys are watching, I'm about to poll you guys. And the question is going to be, what will the result of this game be? It's always
I'm,
fun to see if chat gets the result right.
I'm going to go ahead and guess there may be a little bit of Hikaru bias. So even if the position was like down a queen, they would just say, okay, I think it's still Hikaru.
Yeah,
But
ask.
I am genuinely curious to see the results as
I
well.
love chat saying yes. Ask chat about the GM game. Well, you guys have been listening to the commentary, so you understand the differences going here. I believe in you, chat. Don't undersell you guys like that.
Well, I take it all back because I think that the the poll is giving pretty reasonable results right now.
Yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable as well, actually. I always like polling the masses because, isn't it like the rule of averages or the truth gets closer when you ask more people?
I don't know. It
I don't
sounds
know.
like a
I remember reading something like that, but I'm probably just butchering the explanation. Anyway, so Hikaru pushed his pawn all the way to h5. Why is he pushing that pawn so far? Isn't it going to be an easier target for Dubov to attack?
it will become potentially an easier target. But if you look at Black's pawn chain now from G7 to E5, that means that E5 is really sturdy here. There's no way to attack it. And then F6 can't attack that one either, even though my pieces are far away. So the only way I can attack F6 is if I play H6 to remove the base pawn, the start of the pawn chain. And then sometimes you hit the start of the pawn chain and the whole pawn chain collapses. So white can consider G4 here, and that way you can just really go after like play g5 next to attack f6, and if f6 is undermined, then e5 becomes a problem. So that's the kind of strategy that sometimes you need to employ from the white side in a position like this.
Absolutely. And updating on the poll, so we got 67% of people voting that it's going to be a draw, 22% saying black wins, and 11% saying white wins.
I would say that 11% is a bit too high for white wins, but other than that, I think that that's a pretty fair result of that poll. We got a lot of GMs in the chat.
Yeah, I know it. We got some smart lurkers in here. And I put it in our channel. We could have also put in Hikaru's. Definitely, I think we'd see more Hikaru bias there, but that's good because you guys are believing and you're supporting for your warlord here.
That's certainly the case. And G3 was chosen by a car rather than G4, which is interesting to me. Probably not wanting to commit all those pawns. Alexandra were saying, isn't h5 a bit risky for white because you put your pawn all the way advanced? Maybe it gets overextended. So g4 would have been committal, especially if you can envision that knight on c6. It's a long ways away, but going to a square like e6 or actually d5, which is not so far away, then that knight would have the f4 square as a permanent outpost, which is probably why Hikaru was a bit reluctant to push that g2 pawn all the way to g4.
Okay, and he moves his king to g2 as well. He's making some fast moves here. His king is better placed on g2 as well. If his rook ever needs to hop to the h file, now he can do it. It's more of a defensive structure, and it's one of those moves where it could be played at any time, and he doesn't have a concrete move that is sharper, so it's fine to go for it now.
I certainly agree with that. And 97 played by Dubov. And I guess this is the exact reason why Hikaru put the pawn on g3 rather than g4. You see it much more clearly now. Knight d5 into f4 would be a problem for Hikaru if this pawn were not on g3.
Right, so we need the pawn on g3 defending that square. And Hikaru plays rook e4, another pretty slow move. And I say slow because he's not going for any pawn breaks right away. He's kind of keeping the tension here. His knight is protecting d2, so he doesn't have to worry about that. I wonder if he's trying to get to h4 with his rook. Or to g4.
Rook g4 seems like an option, but the problem is even if this rook gets to g4, black will always have a move like knight to f5. Because your rook and your pawn would sort of need to share that square in order to remove the knight and allow me to get this pawn on g7. So I think rook d3 is a good starting move for Dubov. It won't allow Hikaru's king to go from f1 into e2, where the king will be nicely centralized. It would protect the d2 pawn another time, and there's rook d3. And already I'm starting to see this position in a different light here. At a4, okay, wants to play a5, push forward, break something open for this rook on a1, make it feel useful. But I'm not sure about this because knight c6 was played. I was going to say even black could have considered playing pawn a5, but I like Dubov's non-committal approach. Why play a5 when that potentially weakens the b6 pawn? So instead knight c6. And now, if you can, this is maybe hard for some people to think of this and envision in their head. If all the rooks get traded, black's task of king a6 to a5 to win this a4 pawn becomes quite easy to see, right?
So yeah, chat. So pretend these rooks are not on the board, and the reason why that's relevant is because there's no piece to protect that lonely a pawn.
And that's the downside of pushing pawns, which you did highlight on the other side of the board. The black king happens to be here on the queen side. So I'm looking eventually at some kind of king a6 move. Even in this kind of circumstance, while I may not go to a5 and win your pawn with your rook on a1, it just is inching closer there. And now knight a5 into c4 or into b3 also is good for black because the pawn on d2 is the biggest target.
Right. And for now, the pawn has been fine because it's always defended by the knight. So even if it's being attacked twice but defended once, Dubov is never going to take because he loses material. However, that would be a very different story with, say, a knight on c4. With a knight on c4, then Hikaru would have to bring in his other rook to defend it, but that would make his pieces tied into just defending the pawn. And while his pieces are tied into defending this pawn, then he can go for the second weakness, which is the a4 pawn, and get his king to a6, a5.
Actually, that's what might happen. And that's one of the big downsides of playing the move a4 when Hikaru played it, is he gave the b3 square. Because if that pawn were on a2, we can just try to visualize that. White would have the move rook e4 right now, stopping the knight from coming into c4. But here, rook e4 would run right into knight to b3, because then the knight would attack the pawn d2. It would be a third attacker, and white would only have one defender to start with, which would win that pawn directly.
Right. So now, are there any creative ideas for Hikaru? By creative, I mean, is there something like rook b1, a5? No, he just plays rook a2, so he's just trying to defend his pawn here. So after knight c4, maybe what Hikaru can try is trying to bring the king in to defend. I don't know. This is starting to get pretty dicey.
Well, the king can't move because the knight on f3 needs the defense.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I totally slipped for a second there.
We mentioned before why he went rook d3 in the first place. It's just he's keeping all of white's pieces stuck. The knight can't move because the pawn on d2 would be hanging. The rook on e2 can't move because the pawn on d2 would be lost. The king can't move because then the knight on f3 would be lost. White is completely tied down here. And from the very beginning, Alexandra, you loved the move bishop d3 from Dubov. And I think now is a very clear illustration of just why you loved it.
Right. And I kind of, Dubov is playing like a machine. He found one slight weakness in his opponent's position, these backwards pawns, and he has just used that to get a larger and larger advantage over time. I mean, he's been playing really remarkably in an opening that originally seemed very weird.
He is playing really just what feels like an almost perfect game thus far. And so what happens when you have these top guys. People, you ask me, like, what's the chances that Dubov wins today to make us have a third match tomorrow? And I said, Dubov's an amazing player. You get him into a position where he feels comfortable. He can find all of these stellar moves. And look at this last move, by the way, after Hikaru went G4, Rook 8 to D5. And the reason why Dubov played this move is White may want to play G5 and try just to do something over there on the king side. Now Black is ready to push his pawn to F5. Say I'm not going to trade over there. And when I play F5, my E5 pawn is defended by two aggressive pieces: my Rook on D5, my Knight on C4. So I'm not just defending the square; I'm doing it in a proactive manner. And then Black will have E4 threats, King A6, King A5 ideas, even Rook D5 over to A5, hitting the pawn on A4 with the Rook and pinning it to the Rook on A2. This is a bad position.
Okay, so Hikaru realizes it's a bad position, and instead of, being slowly steamrolled, he tries to go for something more aggressive. And I say it's more aggressive because he is giving up the pawn on d2. The knight was protecting it, and no longer is protecting it. Attacked 3 times, defended twice. So what could he be going for here? Well, knight f5 seems like a relatively tricky move because then he's going to be attacking g7. And maybe he thinks, okay, well, these rooks are busy defending the knight on d2, so a move like rook d7, maybe I could take on g7.
That's exactly what is being aimed for, is a distraction tactic. Your Rook may directly protect the G7 pawn with a Rook D7, but when I take on G7, now you lose one of your defenders on D2, so it's kind of a trade. But there's still issues there for Hikaru, because after Knight takes D2, if we do the direct calculation, Knight F5 will be played, and then Rook to D7. And so we go forward with your sacrifice on G7. I'll take that knight on G7, because at the end of everything, once we trade pieces on D2, this pawn on G4 is hanging.
Oof. Yeah, so Hikaru would get here down a pawn, and I guess his hope would be that he can try to save the position. If he plays something like King H3, then Dubov can always play Rook G7, and that way he doesn't fall into D7 checks, losing the H pawn. Okay, and I think are we seeing this played? Whoa, Rook takes D2 instead. I guess that doesn't make much of a difference. He's saying if Knight F5 in this situation, then he can just trade off rooks and then go back and defend his pawn.
He could also play G6. Now that I'm actually thinking about it, the pawn can move. I don't want to move the pawn. I've been clearly just a little hesitant to do so, but Black has the option to also push the pawn to defend it if needed.
Well, so G6, kicking the knight out, and okay, then Hikaru's just down a pawn. So what are his drawing chances now? What would be the way that Dubov can mess up this position and Hikaru can continue even if he's down a pawn?
Difficult question, because really it seems like quite an easy position for Black to play. Sometimes you win a pawn, but the conversion is so difficult because there's sturdy defense. You won't be able to push your pawns. But with this A4 pawn still being weak and a King A6, King A5 later in the game, with the C3 pawn being one that is very weak as well, I just think that it's very easy to play, and I wouldn't be surprised if this already, if you toss an edge in this position, it just wins the game by force. I actually think we're already in that sort of territory where with optimal moves by Black, the game is already won.
Right, which is why I'm thinking, so what does Dubov need to make sure he doesn't do? What would his mistake be here? And I guess, like, he could get into one of those drawn rook and pawn endgames. I think if he keeps his knight on the board, it's easier to try to snag another extra pawn. And also, Dubov will have to push forward at some point. I mean, on the king side, he is where he has an extra pawn, so it's a 4 versus 3. But in order to push it, he either has to create another weakness and get another pawn, or create a passed pawn, and that might take some time. So I think we'll see, Hikaru defending as ferociously as he can.
and he takes on g6 just now. Of course, Dubov will take back immediately and knight to e7. The problem with knight to e7 is not that it's a bad move. It's that black can play rook d7, and you're winning my pawn on g6. But then I go rook to g7 after you take my pawn on g6, and you have to move your knight away or you lose it, and then your pawn on g4 is lost.
And that's what's happening. So if not knight takes g6, well, the problem is what else is he going to play? Knight g8 looks... Okay, knight g8 was played. It looks very passive. He could just play rook f7, defend his pawn on f6, and then that knight only has one square left to try and go to.
Yeah, it's asking for trouble, but it's an acknowledgement that the position is already really bad. So I have to go for something that may look obscure. So f5 played by Dubov, and I mean, all right, you protect the pawn by just pushing it. The knight on g8 still is limited in its escape route, and the queenside pawns are still so weak. These a4, c3 split pawns, that doesn't do white any favors. If that pawn were, say, on let's say on b2 and you could push b3 or something, or if that pawn were on b4 even, you feel a little bit better about the position. But the issue is if the rooks get traded off the board, now the black king goes king a6, king a5, steals that pawn on a4. And even if I weren't going to win this pawn directly, like I know that I'm talking, okay, now knight d6 probably just traps the knight on h6. We got the knight d6. I'm going to go rook g7 check and rook g6. All right.
And we see rook g6 right away. Hikaru might as well bring his king closer to the center. It seems like the best bet here. I still like your knight d6 idea.
I think I'm just... Oh, wait a second. But after knight d6, there's rook d2. And after rook g6, there's this ridiculous move, knight f7, which somehow saves the knight by trading it, which is still losing.
So knight d6, rook d2, and you're saying rook g6 here and then knight f7?
Yeah, a nice way tactically to save your knight.
Right, because here it looks like, whoa, well, my knight has nowhere to go. All of these squares are protected by, the black knight and the black rook. But if I go to knight f7 and knight takes back, well, we have this nice little tactic here that's going to come back and capture a knight. Okay, so it's a good last resort here. So instead, sorry.
No, I was saying that's why Dubov said, oh, I see that. And that actually, you asked me, how can Dubov go wrong? That's an example of it where all of a sudden white was getting very active. So Dubov went rook g5, keeping that knight stuck, saying, my knight is better than your knight. I don't want to trade it.
Absolutely. And that knight is at least trying to get out. So the knight goes to f7 because otherwise it will get stuck at some point. And Dubov just moves his rook over one side here. Sorry, to the side here. And does he have any direct threats here? Not right away. Rook h3 and then, yeah, you're right. King e3 and then you're going to be able to capture the pawn on c3. So he has to get rid of the rook h3 check. He can play king g3. Can he also play king g2 here?
Yeah, you can drop the king back.
Just control that h3 square.
And then do I finally trap your knight with rook h7? I feel like I'm so close to trapping your knight.
Right. Although that knight still has one last escape square, d8. And then if the king comes forward, then it goes to e6. But once it gets to e6, it again only has one square. I mean, it's such a treacherous path for that knight. It's like in one of those movies where it just takes, you only have one right path forward. And if it doesn't happen, you're dead.
And yet they always find the right path, right? It's like
in the movies, yes, but this is a little different.
You're in the cave. It's complicated. You were supposedly stuck there and just praying for help. And all of a sudden, when the bad guy comes, you find your way out. All right, whatever. It's neither here nor there.
No, it's good. I like your movie announcing.
It bothers me. Anywho, King G3 was played. So same idea as King G2, but this way the king's a little more advanced. Probably helpful if the knight is trying to retreat to have the king closer to a square where it can protect it. And if I am Dubov, do I just attack your knight with rook h7? Do I bring my king up with either king a6 or king c6 even, bring my king towards the center, and rook h7 chosen by Daniil?
All right, I'm going to start highlighting the squares that the knight still has left. So I can either go to g5 or d8. g5 is much more intuitive because you're bringing it closer towards your side, your own pieces. The king seems close enough to try and help out the knight here. Okay, so Dubov is doing a lot of piece shuffling, but he's doing it with a very similar idea. So before he was trying to get his rook to h3 to check the king and take the pawn. And now it looks like he can also play rook d3 at some point. So he sees these weak pawns and he wants to take advantage of them.
and rook d3, king h5. So smart play by Hikaru though to try to get the king into g6 and attack black's pawns, but can do up not just steal c3 and after king g6 push his f5 pawn to f4, which yes gives white's knight some relief to come to e4, but you have stolen a second pawn in the process.
Right. And I was about to say, it doesn't feel like it was worth it, but at the same time, I mean, Hikaru couldn't really do much to try to save the pawn. Let's say that instead of king h5, he would have played rook c2 here. I guess the problem with that is just king a6, king a5, the idea you've been bringing up this entire time, because the rook cannot help defend both of those pawns at the same time.
No, it can't. It's a pretty sad rook there on a2. And that's likely why Hikaru said, this is the best practical chance I have. Bringing my king in, and then, I can even bring my king to g6 into f5, put pressure on e5 pawn. If the e5 pawn falls, then the f pawn also becomes more vulnerable. So just these are the type of things you need to do if you're going to survive a game like this. But I still firmly believe that with best play, Duhless' position is winning.
Fair enough. I mean, he's up a pawn here, about to grab another. This is certainly a position where best play feels like that should be enough. He does have a little 4 minutes on the clock, which is in the territory of time pressure, but still enough for him to figure it out. And Hikaru with 5 minutes on the clock. It's good to see though that Hikaru is still playing on. There's no reason to give up just yet. His opponent might always slip up.
Yeah, and it's not so clear cut the path to victory. And one thing that you have to keep in mind is, let's say Hikaru is able to trade two of his pawns. Like, he's going to lose c3. Let's imagine he loses c3, but he's able to trade his f pawn and the a pawn for two of black's pawns, and then gets rid of his knight for the remaining two pawns. A rook and a knight versus a rook, just those pieces with the kings, of course, is a theoretically drawn position, and one that Hikaru knows how to draw quite easily. So that is one of those long-term ideas where, if Daniil gives me the chance, I am going to try to trade off the two of the pawns and then sacrifice my knight for the remaining two.
Absolutely. What? Okay, so we see king h6 instead of king g6.
There's no way that move was played. There is no way king h6 was played.
I see it on ChessBomb and on chess.com.
What?
You're shocked because it's similar to g6 but less purpose, right?
It doesn't do anything on h6. On g6 it attacks a pawn and it brings it closer to the center.
Was it a misclick?
That must have been a mouse slip. Like, I have no doubt that was a mouse slip.
Oof.
Because look what just happened. King c6 was played.
Oh my gosh, he must have mouse slipped.
Oh my gosh.
Gosh.
Yeah, that definitely was a mouse slip or a misclick. But the point is that Hikaru put his king on g6, which is where it should have been a move ago, but black gained a free tempo. Why? The king went from b7 to c6, where now that black king will either go from c5 into b4 and attack that weak a4 pawn from the side, or the king can even come into the center with king d5 to help that pawn e5 feel safer. I mean, yeah, the position was still bad, so the results of this game did not hinge on whether or not he played king g6 or king h6. And I know sometimes it can, and that's, I think, the essential point, is that one vital tempo can change the entire results of the game. In this case, it didn't truly matter, I don't believe, because black was already 2 pawns ahead and in a great position. And whether or not Hikaru saves this will not be because of his king to h6 or king to g6 move there.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, he would have had slightly higher chances, but I cannot disagree with you there. And rook a3, I mean, he is simplifying. If Hikaru doesn't take the rook, then a4 is hanging, and being down 3 pawns with 2 passed pawns is just too much. Okay, and he decides to play rook c2. I don't know. I think we're going to see a resignation soon.
Yeah, rook a3 was a really smart decision, just trying to trade the rooks off because you have 2 extra pawns in a knight endgame, and now a 3rd extra pawn with the knight on c4 protecting your only, I would say, quote-unquote, weak pawn, is your pawn e5, but you can't take that pawn with my knight sitting there on c4.
Well, this game is looking rough now. I mean, it had been looking rough for a while, but it's looking even rougher. I mean, even a5 is coming. There's too many pawns to stop here.
There are 3 many pawns to stop, actually.
Yeah, you're right. But I mean, the 3 many pawns, these ones are blocked for now. So the only ones that are really making progress are those 2.
Oh, I had to make a silly chess joke, and maybe I'll get fried for it. Maybe the people will be appreciative because
The
it came
people
from
like
me.
you too much to call you out for dad jokes.
Oh, well, the chat is going a little crazy here. So thank you, chat. I really appreciate the support here, and I mean that
Oh.
not just because that one time I decided to make a silly, everyone seems happy about it, but just in general, we have so many people watching, and if you're in, you do this for me, Alexandra, and I know you're so modest, you don't have to do it for yourself. If you're watching and you don't already follow Botez Live, that's Alexandra's channel. We're also streaming there. So please give that channel a follow and give her support because you're such a fantastic streamer and contributor to the game of chess.
I really appreciate it, Robert. Thanks so much. So, 5 minutes, 142. I mean, I think at this point, my question is: so how is Hikaru going to be feeling to lose the first game with white pieces?
Probably just like Dubov felt yesterday after doing the same, losing with the white pieces. It puts you in this mindset where, all right, I have two blacks of the remaining three games, so I need to play for more because that is a statistical advantage for Dubov, getting two whites in the remaining three games. And that means you may play adventurously with black in game two, which we saw Dubov do yesterday, and then Hikaru won the second game as well. So Hikaru, of course, cannot afford to lose game two, but you have this psychological pressure to even the score, and that puts you in a very tricky spot.
Absolutely. And you guys, exactly. I see what Chad is saying. Hikaru is doing this so you guys can watch him play a few more games today with, higher stakes. You guys are going to feel more nervous and he's trying to give you that quality production that you want.
I'm sure that's exactly what Hikaru woke up thinking today. I really, losing the first game against Daniil with the white pieces, yeah, that's good for everybody.
I have a fellow streamer, Mr. Llama, saying, "Hey, I just want to say you look beautiful today and your commentary is fantastic. Love you, Hess. Thanks for dressing up again."
Thank you, Llama. Appreciate that. Is it cool to take out the Mister and just say Llama? That works, right?
Yeah, you could say Llama. That works.
Sometimes it's too much to say, right?
So he gives you that long compliment and you can't even say his full name. No, I like it. It's pretty badass, Robert.
I'm just, you just channeling his inner llama without the Mister part.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's catch back up on this game. So what Dubov is doing well is he's not giving Hikaru any chances. He retreated his knight so that he's holding the c8 square. There's no check that is going to work from behind here. The pawn on b4 is 3 squares away from being able to promote. So even if, Hikaru tries something like rook e8 to capture the pawn, or he even takes it right away with the king, b3 is coming, and he's going to have to bring his rook back at some point. Otherwise, b2 is not going to be able to be stopped, even with a knight move, because you can just keep chasing the knight away. So, yeah, this is a little bit tough.
Yeah, the knight on b6 is such a good, stable defender because, as you're pointing out, no check on c8. You want to play rook from b8 to stop the pawn from behind. You can't do that. The knight blockades the file, and the pawn is 3 squares away from promotion. You're right. So it just feels like even if white takes this pawn on e5, good for you. Like, have that pawn. Black will play b3, start pushing this pawn further and further up the board, and not going to be any real way to stop both my b pawn and then eventually my a pawn.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to add something more here, but I feel like we've certainly covered what's going to happen in the position.
Well, let's say perhaps what Hikaru must do if he is going to miraculously find a way to survive is take the pawn on e5, then try to take the pawn on f4. And if, I don't know how this would be possible, he has enough time to stop the black pawn from queening, then push his f pawn up and say, okay, you're going to have to be distracted at some moment by this pawn on the king side. It's very far away. It's not going to work out, but that is the idea that he needs to accomplish.
Yeah, it seems like a very difficult, task considering how far his pawn is promoting and how far, Black's pawn is from promoting. But I like that you're throwing out, you know, ideas that are theoretically possible here. Is this what we just saw played? Yeah, so this is what we're seeing played.
Yes. Now Dubov carefully considering where to put the king. You can't put your king on the wrong square. And for instance, king b5 is definitely a good move here. But there are some times when putting your king on b5, even though it's the most advanced square, would be a bad thing, because when you go b2 and b1 and get a queen, knight from e4 comes to c3 with a check. I know here there's a rook on a3 and all this stuff, but I'm just noting that you have to be careful about your king placement, because sometimes moving forward is actually hurting your chances rather than helping them.
And what, Dubov also has about 23 seconds on the clock. I mean, he's a veteran in rapid and in blitz, so I don't think he is going to lose on time. But hey, he's making it exciting for you guys. The clock is ticking. Are we going to get to 10 seconds? I think we will.
And everybody's going to be screaming clock, huh?
You predicted it, Robert. Not just the moves, but also the chat. Chat, you got to make sure Robert can't predict everything we're doing here.
But he definitely made a move, because I see that down underneath us.
Yeah, no.
King on b5.
He did make a move. We see it in the live board. It's just an issue with the relay. So let me just refresh. Okay. All right. He has a minute 22, and Hikaru also has less time. Surprise! The clocks are a little bit different. A lot of people are saying that Dubov looks like Will from Stranger Things. I do see the resemblance, you guys. I do see the resemblance. Will is a smart kid. Dubov is a smart mid-20s adult.
Well, does that mean that Will is going to... Did you just ruin Stranger Things for me? Will's about to grow up, become a grandmaster, play in the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge final.
Yes. He was so tired of living with that weird underground thing that he said, you know what, I'm just going to focus on chess. We found him. Okay, so Hikaru, he can't take the pawn on f4. I'm worried that it will be a little bit slow because b2, rook a1 is coming. Basically, as black here, you want to get your pawn to b1. You want to make sure that you're going to support the b1 square. So first you play b2, and then you bring a supporting piece so that you can continue even further.
Yep. And the pawn f4 will be lost at some point, perhaps now, but then in comes the knight from b6 to c4. And there it is. Love it. There's the chat. And it's funny because the poll went up, is chat too predictable? And I said yep, knowing exactly what was going to happen afterwards. So I'm going to vote yes, 3-head on the poll here.
It's
channel.
Good to see that even Robert participates in the polling here. So king d4, I wonder what he's trying to do here. I mean, he's still, holding some of the black's king's squares here. Does b2 just work, keeping the idea simple? Or maybe if you play b2,
it just works. That's why you're struggling to have a response. You're like, wait, but I don't see anything.
It's just a really straightforward move. Okay, he plays rook a5 instead. Oh, that's even cleaner.
Rook d5's checkmate.
Yeah.
So knight c3 had to be played, but rook d5 was not just a check; it was checkmate.
Sorry, you're right. Checkmate. No, for a second, the way you responded, I thought he made a blunder or something.
No, I just don't see checkmates in the middle of the board very often.
Okay, fair to get excited. Okay, and Hikaru resigned here, so that is game one. Oh my gosh. And Robert, I have to just run to the bathroom, but before I do you want me to give you a follow your analysis board if you want to review anything?
Sure, why don't we do that?
Okay.
And I love how you always, you just as soon as something controversial happens, or you.
No, I've been holding this entire game, Robert.
Well.
But I had to see the end.
I got nothing there.
Okay, sorry, too far. Too much information. I mean, not too far. It's a normal human being thing. Okay, you're GM Hess, right?
That's right.
Okay. I invited you, and I'm going to make you the owner, so you can do it. Okay.
Wow, I feel like I have so much control. Okay, we'll talk to you in a bit.
All right, I'll be BRB. Sorry.
And now I can do everything here.
Wait. Is it working? Can you make moves?
I believe so. I'm just sending in the players' names because that's helpful.
Beautiful.
So I can make the moves. Can everybody see it? I think everybody can see it.
Yep, they can see it.
Haha.
And I'm just gonna fix the board size, because I'm also gonna get a coffee real quick.
Oh, okay. So you
sorry.
just.
I'm sorry. I need to do both. Okay, go ahead, Robert. I'll be back soon.
Wow. Oh, get on a coffee break? That wasn't, agreed to. Okay. Well, now I'm by myself. So great. Thanks. Hey, everybody. This is me. I'm here on Hikaru's channel, on Alexandra's channel, and yet I'm all alone. So sad times for me. But let's talk about this game for a little bit because we saw a normal Sicilian develop. This knight c6 move played at the highest level in the World Championship match in 2018 between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. It's been very popular. And Hikaru played c3. We often see bishop to b5 or pawn to d4. But c3 is a way to try to control the center with your pawns because you would like to get a one pawn on d4, one pawn e4, which is why uh, Black plays knight f6 to attack the pawn directly. If you play d4, I am going to win your pawn on e4, so probably not an ideal situation. Sometimes you could sacrifice a pawn in these kind of Sicilians. Here, that's not what Hikaru was going to do. So e5, knight d5, bishop c4, attacking the knight on d5. e6 is a very popular reply, just protecting the knight directly. But instead, knight b6 was chosen in this game by Dubov. It's still a theoretical move, and as you saw, he was able to push his pawn to c4. Look at me, I'm the captain now. I don't feel like the captain. I feel like I am forced into this work without my partner in crime here. So it feels like this was intentional. But Alexandra and I will talk about this later. So bishop c2, protecting the bishop, d5, gaining space. And here, after the capture on d6, we saw the queen capture. So we have a symmetrical pawn structure, but that changes as soon as it's en passant. Remember, if a pawn moves 2 squares on its first turn, which is the only time it can move 2 squares, and only on this turn, if this pawn could have captured it if it had moved 1 square, you can still take it en passant, but only for that turn. So taking en passant happened, queen d6, castled, bishop g4, pinning the knight. Makes sense. Queen e2, and this is a move that we were thinking quite a lot about because this queen side, the pieces here, not developed, and you want to finish your development, you want to coordinate your pieces, but this knight is probably going to go to a3. This is the only square it can go to from its current position. And this bishop, you may want to play b3 and get the bishop out to b2 or a3, or push the d pawn and then move the bishop out on its current diagonal. So you have options to choose from if you are Hikaru. So queen e2 was the one he went for. And I see that poll about me having all the power. And queen e2, castles long. Let me just also keep an eye on if the next game is going to start. Not yet. Good. Okay. But castle queen's a really risky decision by Dubov here. Putting the king on opposite sides of the board, which means that I would like to attack this king on c8. So after knight a3, Dubov smartly played queen to e6, trading off the queens, saying that, all right, now you're not going to be able to attack me once the queens get traded. And so he chose this move, queen e6. And now in retrospect, in hindsight, where I thought that maybe after the queen trade, this knight was going to come to g5 and steal h7, and that's a very risky decision, easy for me to say, as I didn't really have to calculate to the end what's happening there in such a dynamic. Are you back? I hear you. Now I see you.
I'm back.
Is it a blanket?
Yeah.
Wow. I kind of want a blanket too.
It's really cozy to have a blanket, over your feet when you're at the computer.
That's adorable, honestly. Alexandra, I was at this move here after queen e6, and I was about to say that, I thought queen takes queen and knight g5 was winning a pawn, but it was very risky. Not our piece is easy to say. But at this moment here, Hikaru may have been able to choose a move like queen to e3, offering that trade on the e3 square, because we talked about in the later position how playing f2 takes e3 can help White's position. So I don't know if queen e3 is actually a good move per se, but at least it has an idea that I want to bring my pawn on f2 into the center on e3 and keep my pawns kind of connected to each other all in the center.
I like that idea. I guess the biggest question is, would that really have stopped the plan with keeping the pawn on d2 weak? And I guess it would have. It was really hard to see how things were going to trade off after queen takes e6, but that would have been a better shot, even though it's still hard to move the d pawn forward.
Yeah, and because b3 is what Hikaru chose and sort of the plan that you're going with if you put your queen on e3, just to put that on the board, is let's say black continues normally with a move like, let's say f6, because I really don't want to see knight g5 now, as this f7 pawn is a problem. So f6, then I'm thinking b3, and if we have the same situation as in the game, c takes b3, a takes b3, Now I can play d4 very easily, and I like the fact that all of my pawns are connected here, just like aiming towards the center.
Yeah, you're right. This is a better pawn structure than before because we haven't talked about the concept of pawn islands yet. But pawn islands are pawns that are can be defended here. So white has two pawn islands. Black also has two pawn islands. And in the previous position, white had three. So it's always better for your pawn structures, or not always. Okay, it's never always, but generally, it's better to have the fewer pawn islands as possible.
It's never always. Is it always never?
Don't confuse me, Robert.
Well, I'm going to actually go to just show that because the point that Alexandra is making is a great one. Like pawns like to be connected to each other because the best piece to protect something with is a pawn. It's the least valuable piece. So if my pawn is on d4, let's give me a free move just for a second.
Hmm.
You're never going to take me on d4 as well. I shouldn't say never. You just taught me that. But you're not going to be able to take on d4 so easily as I have my pawns protecting the square. And so in the game, just to go to what happened here, once we got this bishop trade on d3, this pawn a2 is an isolated pawn. And we have three pawn islands for white and just two here for black. So a really good point. And I think actually that's what dictated the rest of the game in many ways, because white was struggling to protect all the pawns. And on the other hand, black's pawns were very safe and sound.
And another concept that this reminds me of is D2 is kind of like a pseudo pass pawn. It's behaved like a backwards pawn the entire game. And by backwards pawn, if there were a black pawn on C2, on C4, oh, look what I did. I just put it on C4. Haha.
Whoa.
I
How'd you
know.
do that?
It's wild, right? I love analysis mode. Anyway, and the thing is that the pawn on d2 cannot move forward without going under threat of the c4 pawn, so it's stuck. And that's why it's called a backwards pawn, because ideally the pawn would be on d4, but it's on the backwards square that it should be, so it's on d2. Oops.
Whoa.
Sorry.
You went a little too far
I
there.
went a little too far there. But in this position with the rook on d3, he's serving as if the pawn was a backwards pawn.
That's a really good point. And it's actually something that, I like to think outside the box. I never quite think about it like that. So I really, it's a really good point because it's serving like it is a backwards pawn because the rook is on d3. But if this rook were to move back, as actually what happened in the game, sort of happened in the game, but
Sorry,
the problem
let me go back to.
it was rook e3 and then rook to d7. And then Hikaru with bishop a3, perhaps d4 just right away. That probably was the moment where d4 had to be played, and that way you don't get stuck with this backward pawn. So actually, this might have been the moment in the game that kind of cost Hikaru not the full point, but it forced him into a position where he was the one defending, and Dubov was the one with just the better position, much easier to play.
And I see that people were polling. This coffee was black coffee with a little bit of milk in it. That's what I always do. I used to be able to drink coffee black, but I've gotten softer as the years have gone by. And now I like a little bit of milk to make it less bitter.
We have the next game, though.
Yay! Okay, I was replying to the poll, but now I'm caught up. We are looking at the game. I'm gonna update the live board. Let's get this party continued. It's already started.
And the board shrunk because you were trying to be so kind and generous to bring up an analysis board when you were going to.
Yes, so kind and generous to make you analyze while I grab coffee. I'm sorry.
I'm always happy to analyze chess.
No, that's true. I know you do. Okay, so Hikaru with the black pieces this time, and Dubov played an English opening. We saw him play the English yesterday as well. Can you talk a little bit about this game compared to his English yesterday?
Well, we actually see the start of a similar position, if not the exact same position as yesterday, where what Dubov eventually did was play pawn to d4, and he gave himself an isolated pawn. But when you have an isolated pawn, so what does that mean? It means that there are no pawns on adjacent files. And if there are no pawns on adjacent files, that means your rook have at least a semi-open file to work with. So that is sort of the reason why you see a move like d4. The big difference right now is that in the game yesterday, Hikaru did not play pawn a7 to a5. His rook was just kind of stuck on a8. He was in a more passive position. By trading pawns in the manner he just chose, now the rook is on a6, putting pressure on a4. The knight on b6 is even more protected. Not that it needed a rook to protect it, because the pawn c7 is doing a good job. But your pressure on a4, the rook is more active. You have more space to breathe.
And also more time than they need. Dubov's at 17 minutes, Hikaru's at 16. They're blitzing this out because they've seen it before, but often when players repeat openings, they try to make improvements, or even just changes since their opponent likely learned from their previous game.
Right. And so you study it, after Hikaru won that match and you may be happy, but he did point out this game as one where like I was disappointed in myself because I felt like I should have been able to neutralize White's pressure. Instead, Daniil did play a very good game, but I kind of helped him along by not finding the best strategies. And so Hikaru clearly studied this opening. He was ready for it a second time today. And if we look at the position, Queen C2 just played Alexandra. What do you think about the decision to give up the pawn on D4? Because now there are two attackers for Black and only one defender for White.
It's a tactical decision here. I think he has some kind of tactics. Actually, for a second, I thought he might be able to win the C pawn. I'm just going to play it out on the board after a move like knight b5. But now I'm realizing that after rook d7, it's actually not that clear, and Hikaru was able to hold both. At the same time, he is going to put pressure on c7. He does get the rook to e1, so it's more of a strategical sacrifice where you don't get the material back right away, but in exchange, you get activity for your pieces.
Exactly. And you could play knight b5 right away or play rook e1 right away. I'm not sure the exact move order that's necessary to claim like the most compensation for that pawn. But either way, it seems like Black is struggling, tied down quite a bit, because even if it weren't for both of your bishops being on the e file there, bishop takes b7 becomes an idea, as your queen is overloaded defending the b7 pawn and the e6 square. And because you play pawn f6, the light squares around your king are also vulnerable if you're thinking about it from Black's perspective.
Yeah, so it would be a little bit risky to go into that plan. Bishop f5 also looks tempting. It's not quite a pin because White can get out of it by blocking with the bishop here. But the reason why I like it is because it's tempting Hikaru to trade off his light-squared bishop, which actually just ended up happening in the game. So bishop f5, Dubov didn't want to trade off his light-squared bishop. I think I may have said Hikaru. I meant Dubov didn't want to trade his light-squared bishop. Then the queen moved away with check. He puts it back on. Oh, wait. They're repeating, Robert.
Interesting. Do you think that Dubov is going to go queen b3 and we'll see a full-on repetition? What I would do is if either of these players keeps trying to repeat, then if my third time, the three-time repetition in chess, the same position happens, three times, the game is immediately a draw. Mm-hmm. So if I were these players, I would think, okay, I can make this draw, but let me use most of the rest of my time or some of the rest of my time and just choose, do I want to switch it up? Because and there it is, bishop
He
b4.
does switch it up. Although I'm surprised that Dubov is the one to switch it up. It's weird because he already has one win, so a draw is a good result for him, but maybe he doesn't want to draw with the white pieces. He thinks this is my best chance, and I'm not really at risk here.
And he chose this line for a second time, so he must feel comfortable in these type of positions where there's a lot of open space. If you trade on e4 now, the white queen gets into e4. It's looking nicely centralized, aggressive, and I think there are chances for both sides in a position like this because both sides have their strengths and weaknesses. But Dubov clearly at home here and is well prepared.
Right, which is why, again, the safe option with Dubov, instead of playing a double-edged position, would be to draw this one, then he has only two more that he has to draw with some solid chess, and then he would win the mini-match. But that's not his style. That's not his style. And I don't know if it's too far for me to just say that's the reason why, but based on his play so far, that's what I've noticed.
And it becomes a potential wasted opportunity because even if he doesn't win this game, he probably feels like I'm in a spot where I have some chances to play for more. And if not, I know the techniques to make sure my position never gets into too much trouble. But if we actually start analyzing specific elements of the position, the pawn on a4 is already under attack twice, and there's only one defender. But the problem is, well, now the bishop on e7 is under attack, but you have to you take back on d4 because if you take the bishop, Black takes the knight. That would be a bad trade for White under these circumstances. But after e takes d4, you can't take on a4 because the bishop's under attack. And even if the bishop were not under attack, if you take my pawn a4 with your knight, behind that knight is a pawn on b7 that's attacked twice. So it would just be a trade of pawns in most situations.
I like it. And looking at the elements here, well, now the bishop does have to be defended. So He has options. He can play bishop f8, bishop d7. The world, thank you so much for the donation. Appreciate it. What else can he try to do here? Rook e8, shifting onto the open file. That's actually a more interesting question. Would Hikaru prefer his rook to stay on the d file, pressuring the d pawn, or shift it over to e8 and get onto the open file?
That's really a tough one to answer. I think it depends on what white is doing. But for now, he chose bishop f8 because he's saying, well, if I put my rook on e8, maybe I'm walking into a pin because I would love to get discovery by moving my bishop away from e7. But if white put another rook on e1, puts another piece in the e file, and that bishop would not have been able to move. So that's probably why Hikaru chose the bishop f8. He doesn't have to think about the repercussions of such a move. But as mentioned, now a4 pawn is under attack. So if I'm Dubov, I play bishop e3 here just to preemptively protect d4. And that way, when I lose the a pawn, at the end of it all, I get the b7 pawn in return. And he goes bishop f4. So different strategy altogether.
Okay, so different strategy here. It looks like the a pawn is under attack, but as you mentioned, I'm just going to show it on the board in case it's a little bit more clear. Then you have rook takes b7. So it's actually a trade. We have two weak pawns here. Bishop f4 is putting pressure on c7, but c7 is already defended. But either way, he didn't want to keep his his bishop on c1 for so long, and now he has a free space to bring his rook to continue putting pressure on the semi-open file, maybe also with ideas like knight b5 here. So I like the move. It's very logical.
I do as well, because no matter if the bishop went to e3 or f4, black can respond with c6. I mentioned earlier the rook on a6 was attacking a4, and I said it was protecting b6, but that doesn't matter. And I actually regretted saying that because these things always matter. You should always tell yourself what exactly your pieces are doing. And why is it important now that the rook is on a6, protecting b6, that allows black to play the move actually Hikaru just played in c6. So if we rewind, go back in time, and I said, it's more active for Hikaru, and I say, the rook on a6 protects the knight, I will not add that part of, but that's not really important because the pawn c7 is protecting it. It is important so that you can free up the pawn and move it.
All right, so I like it. c6 is freeing up the queen, speaking about freeing pieces, as well as the pawn on b7. So it's actually protecting two pawns at the same time. And we like to see those pawn chains. They work together very well. So now it's the base pawn, the b7 pawn, that we're going to need to be careful about. Dubov has a ton of space here, but how does he continue? Because Hikaru is starting to fix the weaknesses in his position.
He is. And one idea to grab even more space, but is a pawn sacrifice. He didn't do it. This is technically a pawn sacrifice, but it's just because it wins material back. Rook takes d4 would be a blunder because of bishop to e3, where I attack your rook on d4, and behind it is your knight on b6, and that's a big problem.
Right, and again, the knight is protected only once, attacked twice, so it would be a free piece here. Hikaru not going to fall for that. Would Hikaru ever want to trade off bishops here?
He would probably think about it, but there's the plus in that the bishop on f4 is very active and eyeing some of these queenside squares. But the downside is you give up the e7 square. Maybe it's one that white won't get to anytime soon, but I'm looking at a rook e1 eventually and trying to get my rook onto the e7 square. So that's why I guess Hikaru chose knight to d5, preferring to trade off the knights. And that would also activate this black rook. If that rook lands on d5, you want to blockade an isolated pawn. And the reason you do that is because sometimes your opponent just gives up that pawn. I know we're even on material and I'm going to go down a pawn by giving it up, but you free up some other space for your pieces. Whereas if knight takes d5, rook takes d5, and then white has to play move like bishop e3, that's a terrible bishop. It's just acting like a big pawn.
Yeah, the big pawn who is, kind of like holding both pawns on both sides, but unfortunately really blocked off by his own pieces. In which case, that makes me think that is there any way that we don't let that happen here? Like something like bishop d2, and then if the knight takes on c2, at least we put our bishop on c3. And if the diagonal ever opens, then he's on the longest dark diagonal of the board.
But even that diagonal is not so promising. So what he did was he traded and put the queen on b3 just to say, all right, I may eventually lose d4. I may lose a4 as well, but I'm going to try to win your b7 pawn. And once b7 falls, the c6 pawn also becomes a bit of an issue. So I think that's what Dubov is going for, is a mass trade. And, queen 8 says, take me on b7. We'll trade with queens. I'll take a4. You'll probably go try to win c6. I'll win d4, and then we'll shake hands because the
Yeah,
position is so
and
even.
see a draw. So, do you think Hikaru would be happy with a draw with the black pieces, given that he is down a point, and at some point it's a must-win situation?
Yeah, he's happy with a draw just because you can't force a win from the black side of things. You can make opening choices that allow you to play for a win, and those inherently have some risk typically.
Hmm.
So Hikaru chose an opening, at least a response to Dubov's opening, that did give some chances for complications. Dubov didn't make the draw that could have happened, instead played on a little bit more, but Hikaru has played perfectly since then, as is Dubov, and so we're still seeing even position. And I think neither player is too displeased with this. Dubov won the first game, still as a lead. Hikaru had the black pieces in this one, and now he gets white in game 3. That's where he's going to take all of his chances.
Very fair. So Hikaru is saving the push for his next game when he has the white side of the pieces here. I mean, if they're both happy with it, we might see it. Let's say that Dubov is feeling feisty and he wants to fight here. I mean, there's nothing else he can do except for trade off because he cannot protect both of these two pawns at the same time.
Yeah, and if you protect the a4 pawn with rook to a1, you're just getting yourself in a passive position. Nobody wants that. And actually, rook a1 may be met by pawn to b5 because the a pawn is pinned to your rook down on a1. So that would actually just be a bad move.
Okay, so if the option is a bad move, then I'm just waiting to see rook takes b7. Why do you think he's taking so long here if there's one straightforward move?
I wish I had all the answers, but I don't, sadly. Perhaps he's just trying to figure out, I know I can play queen takes b7 and liquidate, trade off queens, trade off the queenside pawns, totally even position. And it's actually a good moment, and I think people who are watching can learn a lot from it. If I can just make that equal move, and I know I have that, let me make a different move, potentially, which can cause some confusion. It doesn't change anything, this move order, in the sense that you're going to take on b7 and then take on c6. That's really the next couple moves. But I will say one thing. The rook on d5 is pinned so long as the queen is on b3. So if we just go back a move and play queen takes b7 and trade the queens on b7, black can start with rook takes d4. And that's a big difference because maybe that rook on d4 would then go take the pawn on a4. So what Dubov just did is he removed one of his opponent's potential plans and still went for the queen trade. And that way you've also removed the defender of the pawn on c6. So, in the live position, we just see the queen trades off the board. And now the pawn on c6 is directly under attack. Whereas with the black rook on a6 before and the other rook taking the d4 pawn first, the pawn on c6 would have felt protected, potentially could have moved up to c5. So he has removed a very important option from his opponent.
Yeah, that I was going to say it made a lot of sense. The moves just got relayed really quickly. So I think we're about to see a draw here.
We are, for sure. But maybe they'll play a few more moves and then agree on a draw because it's symmetrical pawn structure, same pieces for both sides. They'll probably just shuffle, rook b7, rook d7, and rook c6, rook a6, something like that.
Okay, so we're going to see a draw. We're going to be moving into the next game very soon.
Yeah, they're just trying to find the right way to repeat. And we have the repetition. I'm just putting the score in. I already know the result.
Marshall, thank you for gifting to Go Rough Riders. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're putting in the result. I see that a draw has been set here as well. And I was curious. So in terms of Dubov's strength, do you see him ever being a contender for one of the best classical players in the world, or mostly just for the best rapid and blitz? And what's the difference there?
Wow, you are really putting me on the spot with that one.
I'm just going to sip my coffee while you answer that.
You give me this really tough question about, is this player going to be, even stronger than he already is and play for a potential world championship, or is rapid his specialty? I think that Daniil is one of the most creative players on the planet. And Hikaru, when we interviewed him the other day, he was saying how Daniil reminded him of Alexander Morozevich, who did make it to the top handful of players in the world. I think even number 2 in the world, if I'm not mistaken, and was just like one of those mesmerizing players. Sacrifices here, sacrifices there, ones that wouldn't make sense or people wouldn't think of. In most circumstances, he came up with these brilliancies. And for Dubov, what is a potential problem for him is his creativity is a blessing, but sometimes can be a curse. When you start going, all different directions in your game, and there's a classical time control, your opponent has more time to figure out. Wait a second, this sacrifice that he's going for, does that really work? And then you spend 30 minutes and figure out, wait, there's a hole there. It doesn't work out. So I think that Daniil is an exceptional player. If I knew what made the differentiation between a 2700 player and a 2770 player or whatever, I would hopefully be there myself. And so it's hard to really pinpoint reasons why or why not this player will not become a challenger for the world championship. But I will say there are so many other super strong players that nobody has a guarantee to play for a world championship title.
That was very eloquently put. And to answer one of Chad's question as well, you guys, this is the final position. They agreed to a... Did they? No, they repeated move because they can't agree before move 40. Yeah, so they repeated the position back and forth instead of offering a draw. This way, I guess you kind of get around the 40 move rule, but who would argue that you could actually... Either side can push here.
No argument for me. Looks just like a draw. And I just want to give a shout out to Forzin, who's again watching Hikaru take on Daniil Dubov. So it's always cool to see other streamers tuning in, watching chess.
Wait, you want to give him a shout out? Let me pull out his card on
so
stream.
Does that mean I have to give another shout out?
Yeah. No, we got to shout him out properly. There you go. Boom, baby. All right, go, Robert, go.
All right, well, you got to give Forzin a shout out here, who will be playing in the Chess.com PogChamps event, which will be streamed all on Twitch. And Alexandra, do you have your card ready?
Yeah, about to.
Because you're coach.
I'm a coach? What? Say what, Robert?
Who were you coaching just before this? Come on, tell everybody.
I was coaching Nim before this, so that was honestly a lot of fun. He was learning really quickly, and I had a great time. So I've been coaching quite a few of the players, and it's honestly just been an honor.
Well, there you have it. And that event starts June 5th, so 3 days from now, and will be until June 19th, if I'm not mistaken. So a 2-week affair of some of the most popular streamers on Twitch who some of them just dabble in chess. Some of them have some game. I've been seeing these people streaming, learning, and definitely improving.
That's true. And I actually have been teaching chess for a really long time. I started teaching when I was 12 and did it pretty consistently until I was 19 and had to focus more on my other job. But I forgot how much I miss teaching. It's such a pleasure, Robert. And it's much less difficult than when you're focusing on your own games and trying to chat. I feel like you could totally be in the moment even when you're streaming. And I know it's a little bit, less fun for chat because I interact less because I'm focused on the student. But I mean, this is kind of rewoken one of my passions.
Well, I feel like you teach people every time you come on and do some of this coverage. So I think you're always coaching.
Aw, thanks so much, Robert. I appreciate it.
Just, perspective here. It's funny because I sometimes have this mindset too where I'm doing commentary.
I mean, you've coached a lot as well, like most notably the women's Olympiad team, which is super intense. I remember Robert working crazy hours at the Olympiad, and then one of his players, I think they were going to get the bronze medal, and she blundered, and Robert just collapsing in sadness in the corner of the room. And that was one of my earliest memories of Robert.
I'm glad you probably have a photo of that. I'm sure
I'm sure I have a photo of it.
Yeah, that was a tough one to swallow, but it just it's funny. I was going to say that when you hear the word commentary, you don't always think of it as coaching, but I really do feel that way, especially these days where there's so many people who are writing to all of the chess streamers these days. Like, I haven't played since I was a kid, and I'm really now getting back into it. And thank you so much. I'm learning different things every single time I tune in. And it just is a great reminder that even if it's not a one-on-one personal student like you had earlier today with Nim and you've been doing with Nate Hill and Box and other people, it's just a good reminder that we are able to help people learn the game of chess if they want to. And that for me is so important. And I'm very lucky and privileged to be in a spot where I can do that.
Yeah, that was very nicely put as usual, Robert. So for those of you tuning in again, let's just remind you guys, the second game just finished. The score is 0.5 for Hikaru, 1.5 for Daniil Dubov. Dubov can draw the last 2 games and he will win this mini match. So Hikaru is in a must-win situation. He is getting the white pieces next. So that is the game he is most likely to try to push for. Of course, if it ends up in a draw, he'll have to push with the fourth game as well, but that is his best chance. We'll see what he does. He's probably going to come up with something creative. I'm excited to see the game.
So am I. I'm always excited for more chess. Come on. When we finish the show, I'm like, wait, really? It was 27 hours straight of chess commentary? It's done? What? More
Once more.
I always want more chess.
Oh. Well, you're gonna get it soon, Robert. So that's fair. And a huge shout out to everybody who's watching. We have almost 25,000 people on Hikaru's channel. Again, it's just so crazy to be a chess player and to see you guys watching and supporting Hikaru like this. So thank you so much. And now I will stop being so nice because I feel like I'm getting cheesy, Robert. Gotta get back to my edgy side. I was coaching Slicker yesterday, and he was trying to give me advice to be more edgy. He said I should have 2 slits in my eyebrow and shave off half my hair. What do you think about that, Robert?
Didn't he tell you to just shave it all off?
Oh yeah, and well, I mean, at first he said just the sides, but then he went even further.
He was like, "You should match my haircut," and I sort of saw him doing that. I was like, I tuned in at a weird moment because I didn't have any of the history behind what was going on. I'm like, what's happening here?
Because he had also given suggestions to Hans Niemann, an international master with 2 GM norms. He's 16, that he should be the edgy kid in chess and put like a little queen tattoo under his eye. I mean, he's memeing, but I found it hilarious.
I'm just going to sit here and pretend I didn't hear that.
Robert getting disappointed. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, there's no disappointment. It's just when that there are other ways to be edgy than to do that.
Well, of course. I mean, we know he's memeing, chat. We know he's memeing.
But 16-year-olds are impressionable, and you tell them to get some crazy tattoo. The next thing you know, they're on stream.
If Hans shows up with a queen tattoo, we're gonna have a serious sit down and chat.
I think the sit down is a little late at that point, right?
That's true. I feel like, Hans, we gotta talk about your life choices, man.
Oh gosh.
Although he could do one of those fake tattoos like a troll and just not tell anybody, because they have those now. You can keep a tattoo for 2 months or something.
Right. That's one thing. That's cool, I guess. It's kind of like dyeing your hair for a couple months. It's temporary.
Yeah.
You can always change it.
Yeah, exactly. And chat, some people are telling me to remind you guys that Robert has an Instagram account. He was at under 1,000 followers yesterday. It is rhess91, and I feel like by the end of this tournament we could get him to 5,000, and at that point he has to start posting. Right now it's just food pictures and did you even have a photo of yourself on your Instagram, Robert?
0, precisely none.
This is why we got it. He has 0. He has 16 posts and 0 of himself.
I mean, I have some photos of my brother, and he was like, "Why do I have all these comments? Like, what is going on here?" And I was like, "Just don't worry about it, man." Just.
I love it. This is entertaining because I like poking Robert on the social media platforms he uses the least.
Yes,
but when you do post, it's something genuine.
That's true. And that means people should be on the lookout. Maybe I'll post something because we've done a lot of coverage here together. It's been a great run. And after this tournament concludes, whether that's today or tomorrow, there may be another very sincere, heartfelt message being written. So I have to come up with it first.
That is true. Okay, well, we are waiting for the next game here. So, I mean, this one they played an opening that they had already played before. Dubov could have gone for a perpetual earlier in the game, but he decided to play on a little bit. It's still liquidated, so this game was, on the less exciting side, but I think a good result for Hikaru to get a draw and recover. You're laughing. What happened? What's going on?
The more you guys stream, the closer Robert gets to Kylie Jenner. I'm going onto my Instagram right now. I know this is so. Oh my gosh! I already have like a million notifications. Why did I almost never go on Instagram, and now I have just countless people.
Well, now you can post about turn. You could post like tactics or chess stuff, Robert.
Or I can just continue to post nothing and live my life the way. Oh, the game's up.
Okay.
Woohoo!
Okay. Fine.
Let's go there.
Fine. Um.
You're like, if I must.
Yeah, no, this is more important. Okay, let's get caught up with the game so we can chill more in between chat while we're waiting. But we are here for the chess. So let me just start from oh, actually, let me update the live board. Maybe you can talk about the opening.
Well, if you see in the current position, we have a position where black is missing a C pawn and white is missing a D pawn. So you kind of get the feeling, and I know for certainty it came from the Sicilian defense. And the point of the Sicilian defense is you have now a different pawn structure, and white tries to be very aggressive. Look at this bishop on b3 now aiming at the f7 pawn, the queen on d2, bishop on e3. You may want to play bishop h6 at some point, getting rid of black's fianchetto bishop, which protects the king. But black's structure is very solid. And when you hear about the Sicilian defense, there's this mantra, at least at the highest levels, that the longer the game continues, the better black's chances are because of your very nice pawn structure, your very kind of solid foundation, but typically you have to watch out for white's attack.
Right. So again, this is talking about short-term versus long-term advantages. So Hikaru is going for more of a short-term advantage. Makes a lot of sense. He's trying to go for a decisive game, and he wants to give himself as many chances to strike a blow as possible. Now, Dubov is thinking, usually you want to trade off the knight in the center, no? Because it's such a powerful piece for your piece on c6, which is less powerful.
Sorry, the chat is still making me laugh, so.
Wow. Chat is distracting Robert? I thought that was impossible. Chat, we're getting to him. We're getting to him. Oh my gosh.
Well, there was one
Next thing we know, he'll be on TikTok.
There was one there was one comment in particular that by a bunch of G's and a bunch of C's, he's going to post nothing. Pog considered me followed. I was like, that's a good one. That's a good one. All right, knight a5 played by Dubov, clearly going after this bishop on b3, which is on a very useful diagonal aiming at the black king. So by capturing this bishop, you're removing an aggressive piece. But at the same time, black's knight on c6 was one of the more advanced pieces. So if you can just, let's say we make the move bishop h6 here for white, and black takes on b3, then you look at this position and none of black's pieces are past his own third rank, whereas white clearly has a more offensive stance.
Certainly. But again, this goes with the fact that white is the one who has more space and more development here. But imagine that we get into an endgame, then all of a sudden Dubov is the one that's solid that can play against Hikaru's structural weaknesses.
That's right. And I mean, right now it's already a difficult choice for Hikaru because several moves look good. As mentioned, bishop h6 looks good. Bringing either of your rooks into the center feels good. The reason why I would delay the rook a1 moving just yet is because I know my opponent wants to take my bishop on b3. And when that happens, I have a takes b3, which will induce the move a6. So I feel like I can, if I work this right, I can sort of gain a move or force black to play a6 even if he doesn't actively want to make that move.
Interesting. So why is it important to try to induce Dubov to make that move?
It's not about the move itself as much as that you spend a turn playing that move. So, you know, if Dubov never has to move, let's say white plays rook a to d1 here, just for example.
Okay.
And then black says, all right, well, I'm going to start with the move like knight takes b3, a takes b3, and then rook c8, something like that. The point is that I can play rook c8 in one turn without worrying about my a7 pawn. And now if you want to attack my pawn, you have to spend a turn attacking it, and then I will defend it when it's directly attacked, rather than having to just white makes some other move to start with, and then I have to spend that turn immediately. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Timing in chess is really important. It's not as big of a deal as, say, winning a piece or getting some type of advantage, but slowly the tempos do add up because if you have more time to develop your pieces or create weaknesses, then it's obviously going to be an advantage for you eventually. So Hikaru plays bishop h6. And this is a move that I always love playing in rapid chess because I always feel like the dark squared bishop on g7, you know, he's protecting the king. It's on the long diagonal, and I would love to just trade it off and start to go for some type of kingside attack.
And that's exactly what Hikaru is doing. And note that if this knight ever captures on b3, after a takes b3, exactly what I was saying will happen. Black will have to spend a turn playing a move like a6. And, okay, well, it transposed essentially to what we were looking at before. But I thought, at least for a moment, Hikaru could have delayed rook a d1. Not that it's a bad move, but I was just looking at that tempo as something that you could benefit from.
Yeah, and somebody in my chat is saying that an old Russian used to say that one pawn is worth 3 tempos. What do you think about that?
Hard. That's I don't want to slam the idiom, but I think it really depends on the circumstance. So I don't know what to make of it really.
That's my least favorite thing about chess players. When a beginner asks us a question, we're always like, "Well, it depends." And that's not the answer anybody's looking for, Robert.
I said idiom with an M at the end. There's
Robert.
a difference. I know.
Okay, anyway, sorry about that. So, rook a d1 played. This is kind of a slow move. So Hikaru is in no rush to start going for any type of kingside attack, but do you anticipate that he will try later in the game here? Is something like f4, f5 eventually worth going for?
Absolutely. And especially with the king on g7, if f4, f5, or f4, e5, now don't play f4. That'd be a really bad move. Look what your opponent just did. Put a queen on b6. So if you move your f pawn, that knight becomes pinned, in which case black will just win material.
Yeah, eventually push e5. I don't even know why I took the bishop on b3 first, just the habit. Yeah, e5 is coming here, and the problem is that the knight has nowhere to go. Okay, so queen b6. We're not going to push f5 here. Queen b6 is a move that I like because the queen on d8 wasn't doing much, so he is activating the queen. Of course, when you bring out your queen, you also allow your opponent to try to attack it, which is a little bit annoying because your queen is the most powerful piece. So when it's under attack, you can almost never trade it. You have to move it away, so you often end up losing time. So for example, if the knight wasn't on f6, the white knight wants to get to d5 anyway. It could make that move with a tempo, attacking your queen. And, we keep getting closer to those 3 tempos worth of pawn. No, just kidding. Robert said that was wrong.
I didn't say it was wrong. I just think it's situation dependent because sometimes it is that case. Other times it won't be. So it's confusing. And I'm confused. And I'm sorry. Don't blame me. I'm just a man.
Oh, yeah, for those of you asking for the Robert at the Olympiad photo, I'll look in between games. So during the games, we'll focus on this. And then after, we can chat and relax a little bit more. Okay, so queen v6 played. You're Hikaru, Robert. You need to win. What's your plan here as white?
Takes, GG, yo.
I love it. That was cute. Okay, but actually...
actually, I think that one of the ideas that white might play for is knight to d5 anyway. And there it is. Just as soon as I said it, he played
He was waiting for you to set it up.
He was waiting for me to channel my inner Hikaru, say it, and then now it's on the board. So the point is that actually after knight takes d5, you can even take with the bishop on d5, but I'm thinking e takes d5, and now this pawn e7 is a real target. White will try to play rook f to e1, rook to e3, other rook to e1, pile up all the pressure on the pawn e7, and it can actually be very difficult to defend.
Right. And of course, in exchange, so what do we notice in this position? And I think it's being played out on the live board, so it's okay that we're here. There are 2 semi-open files. An open file is a file with no pawns on it. A semi-open file is a file with 1 pawn on it. And usually, you want to place your rooks on the closest thing to an open file, and here that's a semi-open file. So we have the E file, but we also have the C file for black. The difference being that the C pawn is more protected so far than the pawn on E7, and the E7 pawn is also closer to the king. So losing the E7 pawn would put black's king in more risk versus losing the C2 pawn, which, would be unfortunate for an endgame, but no immediate repercussions.
That's exactly right.
And actually exactly what we're talking about happened. So Hikaru put his rook on the semi-open E file, and Dubov put his queen on the semi-open C file.
Yeah, queen c5 was a really nice move, and a very important move at that, because if you take it on b3 right away, let's say instead of queen c5, black took on b3, white would have been able to take back there with the pawn, the a pawn, and after queen c5 now, you're attacking d5, but I could play pawn c4. So I just create a pawn chain, defend everything. My knight on d4 is so wonderfully centralized. But by playing queen c5 right away, you took away the option of c4 because black would have been able to take it.
Right. So he saw that difference in move order, and he played first his queen out to c5, and now knight takes b3. And if a takes b3, the problem now is, as you mentioned, the d5 pawn is hanging. So instead, he has to either take with a c pawn or with the knight. The problem with taking with the knight, though, is that isn't c2 hanging?
And the problem with taking with a c pawn is the d5 pawn is still hanging. So it's like you have three options, none of which look ideal. So you should probably, I think, to keep things complicated, take with the knight on b3. And after queen takes c2, you queen d4 check, hitting the king, hitting a7 pawn, you're laughing.
Well, somebody said Hikaru's playing the moves that Botez Lives thinks of. Monka S. Is he about to blunder his queen? Question mark, question mark. I honestly hope not, chat. I don't think that's going to happen. Relax. It's fine. It's fine.
I have a hard time imagining that.
Yeah, yeah.
But he did mouse slip or misclick in the first game, so maybe it's...
No. I couldn't handle it. I would feel like I'm a curse if that happened.
Aww.
So hopefully not. I'm trying to figure out what the best option here is, and intuitively it's knight takes b3, because if we're going to lose a pawn, at least let's not get doubled pawns as well.
That's true. And when you get knight takes b3, you clear the d4 square for your queen, which checks the king on g7, hits the a7 pawn. So you do have immediate counterplay. But the fact that Hikaru is thinking a bunch after knight takes b3 is not a good sign. It's a sign that he's trying to figure it out, of course, and he has plenty of time left, 11 plus minutes. But I just think that it shows he's not as happy with his position as he would like to be.
But he did just take on b3, so he's going for the plan you suggested. And now you're Dubov, and we're trying to consider, okay, so what's better, the pawn on c2 or the pawn on a7? And also, can white even take the pawn on a7? Because then he gets something like rook a8, you take the b pawn, you got to move the bishop, but eventually the rook will get to a2. It's a little bit to calculate here. But I think queen takes c2 is the first line that Dubov has to think of. And in general, when you're trying to come up with a plan, you usually want to calculate the line with the takes first, because it's most often the correct path. So you're saving time, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And so queen takes c2 will see queen d4 check because no other move looks particularly good. You're down a pawn right now. You don't just want to trade queens. You'd rather try to steal some pawns for yourself. And the bishop on d7, that would have been the problematic piece for black. But now that these trades have happened, it's the bishop will be able to go to square like f5 or even a4, depending on where the white queen goes to. And b5 is another square. So
is this old Hess? I was focusing, but somebody sent it to me in my chat, and I was afraid that you would beat me up and steal my lunch money if I didn't put it on the screen.
This is throwback. Wow, what year is that from? Like 2009, 2010?
Oh, man.
It's a long time ago.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Back to it. And before, I'm also getting notice that we have Matt Staples, Forzen, and Voyboy watching. You guys, thank you so much. Matt Staples, incredible poker streamer. Forzen has been watching all along. Voyboy, who is like the favorite, I think, in PogChamps, almost 1,700. I really appreciate you guys, and thanks for keeping up with the chess. Okay.
Oh, I certainly appreciate them. I'm not sure I appreciate you just blowing up my spot with that throwback photo, though.
Don't mess with the Hess. And now, what happened? From like the skull to okay. I can't get over this, but I will because we can talk about it during the break.
Just, to the dress shirt. Was that what your question essentially?
Yes, from like edgy angsty teen to like Superman in training.
I was wearing a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles t-shirt the other day. You remember that, right?
I do.
Some things don't change.
That's true. But speaking of, they did go into the variation we were looking at. So Hikaru did decide to take the pawn on a7. And here there's a lot of thinking to go because b2 is hanging, but so is b7. But then a2 will be hanging, but then the bishop on d7 is. So how do you start working through these calculations?
That's a good question. So rook queen takes b2 was played, and now you're thinking, oh wait, queen takes b7. What's happening there? And look at Black's pawn structure still. There's one compact pawn structure now that's remaining after Queen B7 was played. You have all your pawns connected, one pawn island. White has A2 pawn, which if you allow it to survive for much longer, it can become a pass pawn. But I'm probably not going to let you keep that pawn. I won't take it now because after Queen takes A2, there may be some kind of rook moves that distract your queen away from attacking my knight. Perhaps it's still good for Black, but it makes me a little nervous. I was thinking just bishop A4 at the start to just get my bishop out from under attack, put an attack on your knight. We have an even number of pawns. We have even number of pieces. A2 pawn still hanging, which then would put a second attacker on the B3 square. Bishop is there. So I feel like that is the safe and sound option. But if you go and calculate well, Dubov is certainly thinking about taking the pawn on A2.
And I like bishop A4 because it seems a little bit more complicated. But I want to challenge what you said just slightly because Dubov is playing with the black pieces, and if he's able to draw this, he only needs one more game. And it seems like queen takes A2, it makes it a little bit easier to simplify.
Yeah, it definitely, if it works, then it's 100% more simple.
Okay. And so now he's thinking just, does this variation actually go through, or are there tricks where my queen gets kicked out, I'm no longer attacking your knight, and I lose a piece?
Right, I'm like thinking rook A1 after queen takes A2. Where is the queen going to? If you make the mistake of going queen to B2 to save your queen, then I'll go rook to B1, which hits your queen and protects my knight, and then I can take your bishop next move. So that's the thing. Of course,
and
you won't play
queen
queen
C2, I mean, it's still a little bit tricky because your queen can still get chased here. Maybe moves like knight D4, you even have to calculate.
Right, and it probably works out for Black, and I'm actually pretty sure it does. But that's why Dubov is sitting and thinking right now, if he had 12 seconds on his clock, he would play bishop A4 and not have to worry about it. Yeah. But because he has the time, he's wisely spending it, and you're 1,000% correct. Like I said, queen takes A2. If there are no repercussions there, that's the move you should play because you're taking away your opponent's pawn. You're saying, let's trade minor pieces. Liquidation helps my drawing chances, and I'll get white in the final game, and that's a big advantage.
And again, I think maybe, the analysis would even be similar in terms of, it's probably a draw in any of these lines. Okay, so he does take on E2, but it's just simplifying and playing, the easiest line for the result he's going for.
I really like what you said, because if that pawn A2 were not captured, that outside pawn can become a pass pawn if I am able to push it. So I think that getting rid of it safely, which is what Dubov has done, is the best strategy just to avoid any kind of struggle as time starts ticking. I see what you did. Don't think you can get that by me. I see that.
I'm just answering chat, Robert. That's all. That's all
I just turned. I turned very quickly and I saw it.
Well, also shout out to over 3,000 of you in Hikaru's chat. Why is everybody vibing?
Over 3,000? Just 3,000?
Sorry, 30,000. 30,000. The extra zero. I'm so sorry. I meant 30,000. I don't know why. I often read numbers wrong. That's strange. I don't know why. Anyways, 30,000 people. I don't know how to
diagnose you here. I'm not a licensed doctor.
Huge shout out to you guys. No, but it's not even a math thing. It's a reading thing. It's like an English problem here. Not saying that anyway. Okay. Thanks you guys for watching. So, is there anything Hikaru can try to do to be tricky here?
No. I'm looking and I'm trying to find something, because if you take the bishop on D7, I take your knight on B3, and there's just no way possible for white to play for more when you're down a pawn to start with. And I think at best Hikaru is making a draw in this game, and he probably should figure out a way to do that soon, because if you try to play for a win here, you're really playing for a loss, because Black is the only one, I think, that can get away with something more here as you start up a pawn and there's no pressure that white can put on Black's position.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess then we might see another draw, and it's going to go up to the last game. Man, that's a lot of pressure for Hikaru, but also for Dubov, who I'm sure is nervous that he might choke because he's so close to coming back.
Although you'll definitely take the lead with the white pieces in the fourth game, that's for sure. And one line I do want to show is, let's say we start with queen takes d7 here. I want to show some subtle differences. And rook a1 was just played, and we're going to see a line similar to what I'm going to analyze. But let's say instead of rook a1, queen takes d7,
Queen
black
takes b3.
queen takes 3. You cannot play rook takes e7 because your rook on d1 is hanging with check.
Oof, yep, that's tough. So you can't win the pawn back. You have to first take care of the situation. So let's say you move the rook over, something like queen b1, rook b1, then you're giving the pawn on d5. So that's although you're not really giving the pawn on d5 because e7 is hanging, but you can play a move like queen c2 and keep putting pressure on the b1 rook. So you can't take on e7, and then Hikaru has to play this down a pawn.
Exactly. And in the game, rook a1 was played, so we're about to see the essential difference. Is rook a1, queen c2 was chosen smartly by Dubov, and now you can take on d7, because after queen takes d7, queen takes b3, you can play rook takes e7 as your rook is no longer under attack. And so white regains the pawn, no advantage, but you restore material equality, and in that case, the position should be level.
And another important thing to point out here is that the D pawn does look like it's under attack, but I don't know if you should play rook takes c7 or just scoot the rook on over, because rook takes c7 does allow queen takes c8, and then the rook is coming to a8. So this seems a little bit dangerous for black, and he might as well not play the more dangerous idea. So he could just shift his rook over, attack the queen, and then the queen wants to protect the pawn on d5. So the only option to do that is queen b7, which protects the pawn, but also offers a trade, and trade in an equal pawn. And not just equal pawn, but equal pawn structure style endgame, where they both have an isolated pawn, 2 pawn islands, is going to be very drawish.
It certainly will. So actually, we are seeing this exact line that you were just highlighting here. And now rook ed8 is an important move for Dubov to find. Otherwise, he will be on the slightly worse side of things here. Or not slightly worse, maybe under that attack that you mentioned. So rook ed8 is a very nice move, attacking the queen, protecting the pawn on d6, making sure you're not hanging a rook on e8, and now queen b7 likely to be played, and in which case we will see a series of trades and an equal endgame.
Absolutely. And I also wanted to shout out It's Slicker, because he's playing chess. He's going to be playing in PogChamps. We did a lesson yesterday, so it's good to see that he's still training. I love it.
And he's playing Nim, right? I see Nim. Does tournament practice for Slicker.
Oh, are they playing? Yeah, they're playing each other. Oh, that's awesome. The 2 people I coached going up against each other. Who will win?
You know what that means? That means that, well, actually, we can't really talk about their game in case somebody tunes in and starts telling moves. But we can just put their game on the screen after it. When this game ends, we have another game to look at.
Yeah, sounds good.
I'm just trying to distract you so you stop talking about photos of me and Instagram and all this stuff. I'm trying to, shift the attention.
That's a great idea, Robert.
Oh my gosh, it's back. Oh.
I think I should just leave that up for the rest of the game.
You can. Actually, I really like that cover, and I thought it was cool back in the day. And
I love how you're pushed up against a brick wall, looking like it's you against the world.
What borough do you think I was in?
You chess against the world. Yeah, that looks like Manhattan, but what borough?
Yeah, well, Manhattan is a borough. So.
Oh yeah, that's true. Manhattan is a borough. Sorry.
It was in Brooklyn.
It was in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
That was going to be my second guess, but obviously you're either okay, not obviously, but knowing you're between the two. Most likely Manhattan, but it looks a little bit more like Brooklyn in the photo.
I also go to Queens.
That's true, but less often, right?
Now you're trying to figure out my whereabouts. You're not going to data track me. No, this isn't happening right now. This is going to be a draw, though, in a second. They're making repetition here. It is a draw. So
okay. So we're going to have another draw, you guys. They are before 40. Oh, they're at 40 moves now. So I think
Oh, they're still playing? I put the draw in too soon?
I mean, they're still going. I think they're just stretching their fingers here. Okay, they drew. Yeah,
they drew. And what was I saying? Oh, Brooklyn, Queens. Yeah, that. Oh, you took it down.
I did.
They thought it was a good idea. They thought it would be a creative cover, and I was like, okay, I'm here for it. Let's do it. And it was a fun day, even if you know, the image is one that I'm not unhappy about it. I just yeah.
Chess.com sent me a new card for Forzen. Here it is. It says twitch.tv/Forzen role player here. And this is kind of a cool photo of him. I like the hair. It's very edgy.
We all
Role
have
player?
old cringe pics. Nothing to be ashamed of.
What is that?
Breaking Beta donated $5 and he said, you don't have to be ashamed. No, I think Robert is proud of that photo. Also, guys, I'm going to turn off text-to-speech because this is also on Hikaru's channel. Okay. So, Robert, just give me 1 second while I do that. Maybe you can talk about what you think, what kinds of opening. I guess it's hard to predict Hikaru's openings because it's hard to predict Dubov, who's going to get the white pieces in the first game. But we know that Hikaru is in a must-win situation, so it's going to be very fun to watch.
I was just looking up is like there are role-playing type of games, but I was trying to figure out is role player a specific game? Is that maybe I'm getting myself in trouble?
I believe
so I'm gonna
it's a meme.
Okay, got it.
I believe it is a meme. Haha. Yes.
It had me speechless for a bit because I was trying to figure out if there's something I didn't know, and it just felt like very suggestive. Can we pull up the Nim game versus?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I should have done that right away. Oops. There we go. Okay. Let me follow them.
We should probably remove the engine bar in case they tune in.
Oh yeah, that's true. Okay. Here you go. Oh yeah. Here's their game.
Uh-huh. Hey, you're doing some good coaching.
It looks like a decent. Wait, Nim is no longer playing Slicker. Oh, this is the wrong game.
Oh, well, I guess they end up moving on.
They ended up. Oh no, I didn't do good coaching. I haven't done the stalemates properly.
Oh my gosh, I blame you. There's no one else to blame. There was nobody else to blame here except for you.
This is my fault, Robert. This is my fault. Oh no, but the thing is, it's so okay. First of all, we have to give GM Slicker props because
I was about to say
he did get his king in the corner. Like he ran away and was going for his last hope here.
This is perfect defense by Slicker.
Yes.
So there is GM in his username, showing off that GM defensive technique by making certain his king would have no escape squares, and then baiting
look at his king.
opponent.
His king ran towards the pawn. He hid. Slicker hid.
Nim, and then Nim took. Nim, only 59 seconds left. He was in time trouble.
Yeah.
And I think he wanted that one back.
Yeah, I'm sure he would have liked to see a take back here, but I still love that they're doing practice games with each other.
And actually, it looks like Nim won the first game between the two of them, so he did win their little mini match.
Got it. And I just checked their screen, so they're not playing anymore. But I'll just leave this beautiful stalemate for. No, I'm changing back to the draw. Okay. A fat dog, soft belly. Okay. So Slicker suggested that I get this haircut. Let's see.
I'm
just because we have a second in between the game. What do you think, chat? Hikaru chat, my chat. You guys think I should do the edgy side cut? Yes, no, maybe so.
I'm waiting for the chat. Do you want my input?
Yeah, what's your input? Okay, I took it off.
My input is that you can rock whatever hairstyle you want to rock, and
good guy Hess.
It's all up to you.
Oh, hang on, my papa is coming in here. Aww.
What happened?
My dad just found another old photo of you.
Of me?
Yeah, look at you.
No, hide that thing. Don't do this to me.
That's
No.
adorable. Robert finished fifth in the under 14 boys division in the World Youth Chess Championship. He earned his first international norm and it keeps going. And it also says that you also play basketball, football, soccer, and hockey. What a Chad, Robert.
I mean, back in these when I was a kid, street hockey days. I can't really ice skate, but we played some street hockey with my friends. That was always fun. And yeah, I wouldn't say when you say played, it was very casually all those games. And way to just do this to me, Papa B. Papa B, I was your biggest supporter and fan. And
But I will
now I
say, Papa Botez has so many magazines. The fact that he was able to find that, like, he must have seen it at some point and bookmarked it.
I was wondering how he found that so quickly and then was just like, oh, let's embarrass Robert live in front of however many tens of thousands of people are watching.
Aw, no. It's good to see that occasionally.
Hey, Papa Botez, if you're listening, we'll talk offline. I would like your address I'll give you my address. You can send me embarrassing things about Alexandra and then I can show them on my streams.
Yeah, we'll see about that. I wish I had the photo from you at the Olympiad. Unfortunately, I don't have that from when Robert was coaching. So.
Oh my gosh.
Robert, you have a deal. How about you read Hikaru? Is Hikaru too?
Is Hikaru in this?
Yeah, let me show you.
Okay, hang on. We have young Hikaru as well, you guys. Are you ready to see young Hikaru? Because you and Hikaru were in the same age group, right?
No, he's several years older than I am.
Several years older. Okay, no, you're right. You're just so wise beyond your
56.
years. Okay, let's see. So this is Hikaru. Ready to see young Hikaru, chat? Here he is. He still had that same signature smile.
Yeah, he did.
Same signature smile. And let's read what it says about Hikaru. U.S. champion Hikaru is the youngest American to achieve the Grandmaster title, breaking Bobby Fischer's 1958 record. His goal is to become world champion. He likes history and math and enjoys tennis.
Wow, that's just a wholesome, little profile.
That is so wholesome, and he has become like one of the best blitz and rapid player. He hates math. Okay, Chesbey, then maybe his dad sent in that bio. Maybe somebody edited his bio. That's what you say.
And to be honest, who's more geeky, the guy who likes math or the guy who plays street hockey, right?
Well, I don't know anymore, Dad. Robert has progressed. Oh man.
I don't know what to say.
Anyway, it's cute to see those old photos from you guys.
I love how I just was like talking about sports nonstop because I was like a middle school kid. Whereas if you ask me that same question now, I would have a much nerdier response. So
Okay,
I'm glad.
let me see. I'm still waiting for the games. And okay, we'll give you guys a reminder. So the score is 2-1 for Dubov. Hikaru is in a must-win situation. If he wins, then we're going to get Armageddon. He's playing with the black pieces, so it's going to be very tricky. And we're going to let him finish. I just want to... Whoa, what are you guys going on? All right, sorry. Continue, Robert. Chad is angry with me.
About what?
That I cut you off. So what are your interests now?
We're not doing this. This isn't a just chatting stream. See, I know enough about Twitch to know the difference between the chess stream and a just chatting stream.
Okay, apparently my board capture is messed up.
Well, it's just you the evaluation bar off.
Yeah. I was turning it off just to fix the situation, but now it's back on and we are fixed. Thank you, Nick. Oh, we have another streamer who just confirmed.
Oh.
Are you ready? It is Ludwig. He is a variety streamer. I mean, he streams so many different games. I've definitely lurked in his chat quite a bit. And he's going to be joining as well. I know he played chess, and I think I saw him playing yesterday as well. So this is super exciting.
I'm
Whoa!
pumped.
He's saluting. Are you ready to salute back, Robert?
No, because I don't know what you can do it. I see you doing it. I'm not doing it.
You know what? That's fine. Then we'll just block you off. If you don't want to participate, you don't have to. All right.
No.
You're just being edgy again. I don't like it. All right, so we got Ludwig announced. That is super exciting. I mean, sorry.
What happened?
Well, we have a new Hikaru emote. Hikaru is gonna have a new emote. It's gonna be live in about 10 minutes. Here it is. What do you think, Robert?
Oh my gosh. Isn't this like, I feel like this is stealing somebody else's photography and shouldn't be a thing here. I'm gonna go bring this up to the appropriate people.
To the Twitch emote committee. Okay, we got games. Games are takeoff, so we can talk about you doing that later.
Also, how it's so funny that people for their channels use emotes of other people. It's like it just makes me laugh. Oh my gosh. Anyway, we have a Dutch defense.
Oh, it's there. It's there. Okay, so a Dutch defense. So Dutch is very aggressive. It's not often seen by top players because it's considered like a little bit more weakening than if you play it like a King's Indian. But the thing is, with the King's Indian, you lose time trying to get your pawn to f5. So must-switch situation. I love the decision to go with a Dutch.
Do you see what's happening in Hikaru's chat?
I love it.
Oh my
Edgy
gosh.
Hess. Edgy Hess is a fantastic name for that emote also.
Oh, man. Okay, but back to the Dutch. So Hikaru Nakamura in the final round of the 2019 US Chess Championship, which he won, he played the Dutch against Jeffrey Jean. So in that last round game, he was tied with Lenier Dominguez. He had the black pieces. Lenier had the white piece against Timur Graev. Hikaru felt if he was going to win the championship, he needed to play for not just a draw, but for a win. And he ended up beating Jeffrey with the black piece in a Dutch. So this is an opening he feels comfortable with, he feels confident in, and it's more of an adventurous plan. It's kind of like a Sicilian on the black king side, right? Like when you play Sicilian, it's the king pawn and then the queen's bishop pawn. I know that's sounds strange.
I'm just hovering a pawn over c5 so people are visualizing it.
And now it became nothing like a Sicilian because d5 happened. So it's more of a sort of stone wall type of structure.
Chat, I hear you. Live board is updated. Okay. So the stonewall structure is when you have a pawn on d5, a pawn on f5, and often a pawn on e6 here. It's known as being a very solid structure, but it also tends towards very close positions, which are kind of tricky to play because it's always hard to figure out where to break it. And it seems like Dubov is interested in trying to break it as early as possible. And Hikaru plays e6, so if c takes, he can capture back with his pawn here. But if he doesn't, what do you think about Hikaru's light-squared bishop here, Robert?
Well, you know a lot about this. Having a poor light-square bishop behind a pawn on e6 is something that you are very familiar with. So what do I think about it? I don't like it. What do you think about it, Alexandra?
I'm concerned, and I don't know what the plan should be with what to do with that bishop. I mean, even if you bring it on the long diagonal, you're still blocked by your own pawns. So I think it's very hard to play with.
For sure. Because then you may have to take on c4 just to create an opening. Sometimes, instead of going to the long diagonal, black plays g5, bishop d7, bishop e8, brings the bishop over to the king side. That is quite a long journey, and perhaps Hikaru puts queen on e8 and then queen to h5 first. But when you play a move like g5, it is a risky move because you're pushing pawns in front of your own king, which makes your king side feel a little bit more airy.
But again, we like that he's doing this because if it backfires, all right, that makes sense. But in the case that he's able to get a tricky, aggressive position and he's able to win with the black pieces, then he's going to go to Armageddon. He has chances of winning this match. So g5, and the question here is, what is his threat? If we gave him an extra move, what would he go for here? Because he has quite a few options in terms of pawn pushes on the king side.
Yeah, so you play g4 for black. That gives white control of the f4 square. May not seem so important just yet, but that square is one that will permanently be under white's control because you don't have another pawn that can easily protect it. However, g4 gets rid of one of the two defenders of the pawn on d4. So that's a removing the guard tactic that white definitely has to be careful for. But g4, there's always knight e5 to try to trade pieces, advance in the center. It becomes quite tricky here.
Right. So g4 doesn't win a pawn immediately. And one thing that Hikaru does have to be careful about is blocking up the king side in a position that he no longer has progress in. So Dubov makes a slow move. Rook c1, just adding support for the pawn on c4, moving his rook into a more active square. And g4 is honestly still tempting, but maybe Hikaru should hold off of it.
G4, it's so committal. And for Hikaru in a must-win situation, you don't want to, unless you're getting something concrete, getting something immediately for that kind of pawn push, you want to refrain from doing so.
That's very fair here. So if he doesn't want to play that, okay, he played it anyway, so never mind. He went for something committal. He does realize that after knight e5, knight takes, d takes e5, white has a little bit of a more funny pawn structure with those doubled pawns, but it also opens up a semi-open file for the white queen, which might be annoying because then the d5 pawn is going to soon face more pressure.
Which you can kind of alleviate that pressure by playing pawn c6. To defend d5 again, you have a very solid foundation there. And you look at the white pawn, excuse me, the black pawns and the light squares. b7 to d5, back to e6, over to g4, which means that your bishop on c8 will never find a useful diagonal. However, black's idea is to eventually play h5, h4, move the king, try to bring a rook to the h file, go for an attack. So if you can close the center of the board and make an attack, that's great. What I would do if I were Dubov right now is I would consider either playing, trying to get f3 to work. I wouldn't do it just yet because some kind of queen b6 check scares me, but maybe f3 still is possible because of some tactics after queen b6 check with white playing c5. But it just, pushing my pawn, forcing your knight out of the center is an idea that I think white would be really fond of.
Right. I guess another thing he could try to do is maybe prepare it a little bit more, but something like king h1 seems way too slow here.
Botez gambit alert. Botez gambit alert.
Just
king
kidding.
h1.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Nope,
I'm
you
kidding.
have to show it now.
Thank you, Robert. I was throwing you an opportunity to help with my branding of the Botez Gambit when you give a queen for absolutely no compensation. I know. What did I do to deserve such a move named after me?
I know exactly what you did. Let's rewind.
No.
Okay, Robert.
Moving on. Moving on.
You might want to play a move like king h1
Moving on.
to safeguard against any checks. Oh, wait. Botez gambit. Knight takes f2.
I meant at some point, not here, obviously.
I know. And as as a commentator, we make mistakes all the time. And the point is, what Alexandra was saying is, if you want to prepare f3, moving your king away out of the diagonal seems like a good choice. Of course, right now it doesn't work, but there still is merit to what is being said. And I agree with that. Like, I would like to get my king out of the diagonal because at one moment a check could be a problem. Here, after f3, Dubov decides to play it because queen b6 check is met by this move c5, which actually wins white material.
Right. So queen b6, c5, and we're attacking the queen and the knight at the same time. If the knight takes on c5, I believe bishop d5 should just be winning because the knight is pinned to the queen and there's nothing to do here to save the knight other than sacrifice your queen. So that doesn't work. And now Hikaru has to decide whether to move his knight back right away or first capture the f3 pawn.
I don't really want to capture the f3 pawn to undouble white's pawn structure, but you may not be able to afford white taking on g4 at some moment either, and that's the big problem. It feels like you have to undouble white's pawns, which is kind of black's advantage in a position like this.
That is true. So we have these two double pawns. I'm highlighting them here. And this was caused after the trade on e5. So if Hikaru can keep the pawn structure to be bad, that would be ideal. So in an ideal world, he could just move his knight away, tempt white into taking the pawn, and then all of a sudden, and I'll just play this on the board to show what I mean, all of a sudden, these pawns are looking even worse because now they're not just doubled pawns, but they're also pawns that can never be protected by fellow pawns. And you can see the eval bar dropping more towards equality if Dubov would play in this variation. Of course, Dubov would also not be interested in taking on g4, and he could just play f4, which creates a nice pawn chain despite having a bad pawn on e2.
Right. And that way you feel like your pawns are safe and sound. You have more space, or the pawn e5, while it is potential for it to be attacked, it's also restricting, in particular, the black bishop on g7, but also some of black's other pieces. So Hikaru is sitting here thinking, do I want to take on d2? If I take on d2, queen takes d2, can I then take on c4? Can I think about trying to get into an endgame? And he does take on d2 here. I don't think he'll try to trade queens just because he needs to win with the black pieces. So a move like h5. Oh, okay, I say it's happening.
And Robert wins predict the move once again, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm done talking. My talking is just...
Robert, you're supposed to commentate, not play. What's going on here?
I was going to say, instead of you talking, just watch what Hikaru does, and that's my commentary. It's the best commentary possible. Having Hikaru Nakamura's moves, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And here, I'd love to see h4 at some point. As a psychiatrist, I'm concerned by your compulsory nature to continue sacrificing your queen. Yes, thank you for the $1 donation. So I really like h4 here because one of Hikaru's main ideas is to try to open up the h file, because if he could somehow, double up with his rook and his queen and start going for some checkmate ideas, that's a really good chance for winning. That being said, I'm concerned about his pieces that aren't developed. The rook on a8 and the bishop on c8 that is... Oh my gosh, in c5, I mean, where is that bishop going? d7, and it's almost looking like a doubled pawn here, Robert.
And you would like to play b6 to try to get that bishop to a6, but after b6, I'll just take you on b6, and now my rook on c1 is perfectly placed, hitting your pawn on c6. And so this is actually a position where trying to play for a win from here is so difficult for Hikaru, because even if you accomplish what we've been talking about with an h takes g3 and getting your queen and rook on the h file, the white king is surprisingly safe on the f2 square. I know you don't want your king in the center when there are queens and rooks and all these pieces on the board, but you can't even give me a check once I get to f2. So I think that the white king is very safe.
Yeah, and it's surprising that the white king is safe, but I think this goes to show the difference in closed positions versus open positions, because in closed positions, you can get away with having your pawns, further away from the king and still being safe, just because these pawns, all of these pawns together are still acting like a barricade, and you can't get your king checked, versus imagine that, the f pawns and g pawns were gone, then you'd be in serious trouble.
Right. And the closed nature of this position, and both having bishops rather than knights, the bishops cannot get around the pawn structure. White is going to put his bishop on d4, nicely centralize that piece. And if black tries to break open a file for the rooks, very importantly, right, there are all 8 pawns remaining for each side. If somehow black goes a5, a4, as soon as you play a4, white will play b4, so I don't open that rook on a8. That's the last thing that Dubov wants, is to give Hikaru some active play, and keeping the position closed is his priority.
Yeah, and closed positions can be very difficult to win, because if your opponent is trying to keep it closed and not both, and you guys aren't both trying to fight for a win, then you usually only have like one open file to start getting your pieces on, or you have to sacrifice, say, like a bishop for 2 pawns. Imagine the bishop wasn't here and you had a queen there to open it up, but that's usually worse.
So the type of position that if I were playing this game, I would be so unhappy, because I just don't see a way to make progress. And then I think, oh, if I try to do something, it's just going to backfire. Like if I ever try to play b7 to b6, does that mean that white's going to be able to take on b6, and now I've worsened my position? So Hikaru starts completely non-committally with rook to h8, going for the opening of the h-file, king f2, saying, I'll put my rook on h1 if I need to, and it's just such a closed position.
And I like that he's doing this before like any forced pawn break like b6, because if he's going to go for something that's probably worse, he might as well improve the position of his pieces. Bishop d7 is protecting c6. I mean, really the bishop there is not doing much else, but at least it's protecting the bishop on c6, so if that b6 happens, at least you don't have to worry about rook captures.
And actually b6 is what Hikaru is going to try for, because he needs to open some stuff up here. And I think white should continue shuffling. Just play rook e to d1. And if b6 happens, you don't have to take it on b6. Take on b6 would be a bad move, helping the rook on a8. Now breathe some life in the position. And after I take back on b6 with the a pawn, black
So
goes
he
c5.
he did his own type of shuffling, rook c3.
Yeah, that also makes sense. And what Dubov wants is for Hikaru to make a move like b5, and just to keep the position locked in. But Hikaru plays bishop f8. He's really trying not to commit to anything until he has to, because he's going to try for b6. He just wants his pieces to be on the optimal square. So he can play bishop e7 next, maybe even queen f8, depending on what he's exactly aiming for. And Dubov is going to continue going back and forth. But I actually think that this sort of strategy, right, where you do nothing as white and you're hoping to make a draw, is really dangerous. And we saw Dubov lose that game to Karyakin. I don't know if you remember that one in the quarterfinals.
Yeah, I remember. That was the position where he ended up blundering a pawn near his king side, and it just gave everything away. And that was just, he got too comfortable. It really seemed like a draw, and that was all he needed.
And this could be a similar type of position here where, all he needs is a draw, and he's kind of playing for a draw, but black is the one who can initiate the pawn breaks. And I always say it's the side that can initiate pawn breaks, the side that's better. Here, king e1 played, trying to bring the king over to the queen side perhaps, but it's not like black is only going to open up the king side. A move like b6 at some moment, or I would like to force open a file even if it costs me a pawn. That's the essential point. So if black could play pawn b7 to b4 in one turn, I would do that. And then I would play a5, a4 for black next.
Yeah, and I'm just putting that idea out here. So here, Hikaru, so it seems like his best ideas to break open are on the queen side. So if he does that, should he consider first playing h3 to put the light squared bishop on a bad square? Then his king is completely safe because there's no way to open up the king side. And then he can just start going for the pawn breaks on the queen side.
I would play h3 for black if it forced the bishop to h1. And the reason why is the bishop on h1 can never get out.
Yep.
The entire diagonal is blocked and it's spiked. You put a bishop on any of those squares, I take it. But if I can go bishop f1, then my bishop can be useful, where I'll play pawn to e3, bishop to d3, and then bring my bishop around to help the queen side.
Yeah, so we don't want to do that right away. So maybe it's better for him to keep the tension there in terms of, maximizing the complications here.
Right, because you want to leave yourself with the opportunity to play h takes g3 if a timely rook h2 will be hard for white to deal with.
Okay, so Hikaru sitting here. Does b6 work now? Is this an option for him?
b6, yeah. I would still try to set it up a little bit. He does play queen c7. He's waiting for the right time to play b6. Sometimes you need to go for it. Other times you have just plenty. You can just say, all right, let's relax. What is Dubov going to do? He's not going to play b4 as white, because then I play a5, and now I open up the queen side. And I just want to remind everybody here about the format, because it's 2-1 in favor of Daniil Dubov. It's a best 4 mini match. So if Dubov gets to 2.5 points, which means he only needs a draw in this game to win the mini match, then we see another match tomorrow, the rubber match. And if Hikaru wins this game, we get Armageddon today. And I think you have a slide for Armageddon.
I do have a slide for Armageddon. Let me just pull it up 1 second.
Yeah, I just thought it was, because there's a lot on the line here, important to
that's a great idea. I just need to
scenarios.
Because I don't think it's named Armageddon.
It's all good. We don't need to show it now. Sorry to...
Oh, no, that's Forzen.
Armageddon Forzen.
Yeah, honestly, this is why they don't like it when I run the broadcast. Okay, hang on. I'm going to pull it up. Just give me a second.
No worries.
Chess.com is going to tell me I'm scuffing the broadcast again. And not that it's a Chess.com one, just because they like to troll me.
Yeah, I didn't mean to do this to you. I apologize.
No, it's okay. I had it before. I just didn't title it. Now I don't know which ones are which, but I'm getting there. So b6 finally played, Robert.
Finally, at long last. And b6 played now with a queen on c7. It allows c5 to happen more easily. And Hikaru is breaking open the queen side. This is the danger of what Dubov did is he just trying to shuffle back and forth, sit quietly, hope that nothing is pried open. But now that the position is getting open, you see ideas for Black to bring this H rook all the way over to B8. Black have tried to play for A5, A4, and Dubov still sitting here trying to claim that as much progress as you think you're making, if you trade me on C5, I just take back with my bishop, all is okay. And if you ever play B5 for Black, then and he played queen to B7. But if you ever play B5 for Black, you have to be worried if you never actually get the pawn break you're seeking.
And you know what? I couldn't find the graphic, but I will tell you guys how the Armageddon works. If Hikaru manages to win this game, then he gets to pick how to go into the Armageddon today, which means that he either gets the white side, which with 5 minutes on the clock, no increment, or the black side with 1 minute less, 4 minutes on the clock, and draw odds. Cool.
You got it. Who needs a graphic anyway?
Yeah, exactly.
We've got Botez.
Now, this makes sure that you guys are actually listening.
And I definitely have been listening, just for the record.
And draw odds means that if the black side gets a draw, so if Hikaru picks black and the game ends in a draw, then he wins the game. So he only needs a draw to win, despite having less time.
Yeah, so he has less time, so that's the trade-off. It's it's much harder to play because you're down a minute and you have the black pieces, but the draw is your friend. And at the highest level, draws happen quite regularly. All right, now Hikaru still better here. Does he play H3? Does he leave that on H4? Because Rook H to B8 is bringing another piece to the side of the board that you can make progress on when it opens. But maybe after Rook H to B8, there's ideas for White to say, you know what, I'll open up the king side because if you're moving all of your pieces to the queen side, then I can take on H4, play pawn H3, or start with pawn H3, and start opening up the side that your king is on.
Right. And usually before you go and attack on one side, or when you're attacking on one side, you want to make sure the other side is closed so that you don't have to worry too much. It will reduce some of the tension in the position, but it seems like he does have some good chances of opening up the queen side now. And Robert, the eval bar is at negative 1.56. What do you make of that?
I think that the position is better for Black, but I think that's a little on the higher end of things. There are some positions because the engine only goes so deep that it doesn't see a potential fortress where Black has more space. The engine's appreciative of that. You're the side that controls a potential pawn break. But in a situation, especially if Black were to play H3, I can envision a scenario where you have more control, but you can't actually do something concrete. And a great example of that is in the 2016 World Chess Championship. There was one game between Magnus Carlsen and Sergei Karyakin where Magnus was much better, and I thought he was going to be winning. And then Karyakin built a fortress, and the engine still said -2 or +2, which I forget. I'm trying to think of this was. Oh yeah, Magnus was Black, so it was -2, but there was no progress to be made.
Right. That reminds me of when you're in an endgame and the engine hasn't gotten deep enough, and it sees that you're up a pawn, and even though it's theoretically drawn, it just hasn't calculated all the way through.
Right.
Or at least the engines we have. A supercomputer obviously would do it. It's more in terms of CPU power here. Anyway, Queen A6 played. Hikaru is bringing his queen on the outside of his pawns.
So I'm trying to figure out what he's aiming for. Probably just go Queen A5 next, threaten the C5 square a little more, and he needs to get some sort of mobility, not just for his pieces, but potentially for his pawns. And I would love it if White took on B6, because then eventually Black will play C5, and now you're advancing and gaining the space that you need. But now King F2 played. Look at this diagonal, by the way, from G1 to A7.
From G1, oh my gosh. Wow, there's a piece on every square, Robert.
You didn't seem as excited as I was, so...
No, thanks for pointing it out.
Your fake enthusiasm hurt. It really did.
It wasn't fake enthusiasm. It was enthusiasm mixed with sarcasm. But what about H3 here? Because if Bishop F1, that is blocking the white rook from getting over.
Do you know what they call that, though?
What do they call it?
I don't know, but it kind of looks like, you're shooting an arrow.
Oh, I thought you were going to say a shish kebab.
That could be the shish kebab.
Yeah, a nice full shish kebab.
But now it's all in red, so it reminds me of a heart. It's kind of like a Cupid's arrow.
That could also work. That could also work. I actually can't remember seeing this ever before.
I mean, it's very rare.
Right.
I kind of like the shish kebab though.
I think we're all just a little hungry here. So Hikaru does play h3, which is nice that he's going for a plan like that. And bishop f1 isn't going to trap the rook here forever. Eventually, Dubov can move the queen, move his pawn, and then he's going to activate the bishop. It's just a little bit slow, but luckily for him, this is a slower position.
Right, because you do have the time to make all those moves, and the rook on g1 it can get out. But as we said earlier, the bishop, if it went to h1, it could not, and that is the exact reason why Dubov said, "I know for the moment it looks like my rook is stuck, but I will be able to extricate it once I develop my bishop towards the queen side."
Because the bishop on h1 would have no escape squares because everything is controlled by one of Hikaru's pawns. So this was the only option here. And now does Hikaru have anything he can do to take advantage of the, 3 moves it's going to take for Dubov to get his rook into the game? If he could open up the position now, it would be awesome. But a move like b takes c5, even though it opens up the position more, it actually doesn't open up enough files. They're still semi-open files, so that doesn't work.
Yeah, so you want to take on c5 and be able to play a5, a4, like a combination of those two ideas. And if you play a move like queen a5 or queen a3, white is probably going to play either queen c1 or queen c3, depending on where you move your queen. So he does take on c5, and we have okay, so rook to b5.
I mean, I understand why you went for this intuitively because it seemed like an exchange that does open up the position somewhat. I'm just curious about the concrete plan that he's going to follow up with here.
Well, he's going to try to trade bishops, of course, to put his rook on b5, then put his queen on b6. And if you take on b6, I take with the a pawn, and I'm advancing my central structure. I'm opening up the a file for my rooks to start attacking your base pawn, the a2 pawn. So I am kind of feeling this plan for black, and for Dubov, I think you need to move your queen and play pawn e3. You just need to make that happen. You can't sit forever with this rook on g1 and bishop on f1 that can't move. You will need to help protect your queen side.
Right. So moving the queen would make sense. Probably moving it the sooner the better. So queen c3 I like because it's putting the queen on the semi-open file and it's allowing e3 here.
The queen d2 chosen instead, probably just protecting the a2 pawn, likely being a little worried about that. And now queen a3 played, and I see the eval bar shoot up. And okay, I know it. Okay, so it wasn't e3. That wasn't the move. And because I see the eval bar go back down. It was e4 instead of e3.
So I'm just going here. So e4 here, attacking the rook, attacking some pawns. All right, and if the rook moves back, what is the threat here?
Woo!
Bless you.
Sneezed on whatever truth was being told.
Aw, Valentine's, thank you so much for subscribing. Okay, so yeah, I'm guessing something like taking on f5, you take, and then all of a sudden you have a pass pawn. This probably looks good. But anyway.
It's also risky though, right? Because the pawn e3 helps shield the white king.
Yeah, so e4 allows this dark diagonal, and the king actually doesn't have escape squares because of these pawns. So in a draw is win situation, I like what Dubov went for, although sometimes being too careful makes you end up losing the game.
That's true. And in fact, we see that happen a lot.
Oh, apparently Hikaru calls 4 pawns on a diagonal like a sprinkler line. You know, on a farm when you have those sprinkler lines. I was only repeating because I was acting like a robotic sprinkler. Not because I can't speak English occasionally.
I didn't really understand what was going on, but now I get it.
No, I understand.
And I needed the physical demonstration because otherwise I really would have had no clue.
That's what I'm here for, Robert. Those visual demonstrations, though. Okay, so Hikaru has brought both of his rooks to the queen side, and his queen is there as well. All of his pieces are invited to the party. He's probably going to try c4 at some point because it's the only thing to do to open up the position, unless his pawn could somehow get to a4, but that's a much harder attempt, or it's just going to take a lot longer.
So you just went bishop e2, That way you avoid any kind of c4 for black. And I know c4 probably wasn't going to be a good move regardless, but a timely pawn sacrifice to open the b file. And now there, I really want to make e4 work because we had the option earlier. So I want to play e4. If you take with the f pawn, I win your g4 pawn, then your h3 pawn. I steal all those pawns. Or I actually, after f takes e4, I have f5 as well to get my queen into an aggressive position. But if you take with the d pawn, I'm hoping to go rook d1 next and just attack you along the d file. That's the problem with a closed position when you're going all in for something. In this case, the attack on the pawn a2 is that if I open the position, your king that's in the center is going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, which is why Hikaru would not take this pawn. But it's still a tricky position. So what would he do instead?
I don't know.
Spam this flower to give Hikaru power. You guys keep it up. He really needs to get this win.
And Dubov just goes back. He's down Dubov a minute and a half, which
okay. And so you see 449 to 633. I just needed to know if I need to refresh. Oh no, the engine eval just shot up in Dubov's favor. I mean, I think the engine just wants Dubov to play e4 at some point, and Dubov isn't playing it.
It's a super risky move because the thing is for Dubov, a draw is the same as a win. He's up 2-1. He just needs a half point. And for Hikaru, a draw is the same as a loss. So anything that maximizes his winning chances, even if it also maximizes losing chances, is worth it. You have to take that kind of risk. And e4 is a risky move because of this opening of the dark square diagonal, opening the third rank. So let's just go e4 if, say, black went c4. There are times where you can't take on c4 because, like, the queen goes to f3 with check. Not in this particular position, but just something to keep an eye on.
Right.
And that's why I'm, just talking in certain ideas on specific moves, and it's likely why Dubov is not even thinking about e4, or if he is thinking about it, he's thinking better of it.
Right. And one thing that Hikaru might be happy about is if Dubov starts spending his time here calculating e4 and then decides not to play it, that's Hikaru will take all of the advantages he can get. If he can put Dubov in time pressure and make him continue defending this position, it's going to increase his chances. And we just see e4 played. Oh my gosh.
I wasn't expecting him to play it. I just went on that little rant about how he's thinking better of it. He's not going to do it. And that's the thing. You mentioned this earlier, Alexandra. Sometimes you play passively and you get ground down because your opponent's plans are easier. You're in time trouble. He played e4 with 3 minutes and 40 seconds left on his clock because he probably recognized that if I keep this game like a slower pace, I'm also making moves quite slowly myself. I don't have enough time if there's a critical juncture to find the accurate reply. So e4 played, understanding that opening up black's king is to white's benefit.
And Hikaru is not interested in opening up his king, so he pushes d4 here. Does e takes f5 work? I mean, that's the move that we consider right away since that was the move that is now created as a result of e4. Okay, no. He wants to increase the pressure first with his bishop as well. So Dubov's still kind of playing this safe? Sorry, go ahead, Robert.
No, I was going to say, if I was playing for a win, I would think about e takes f5 for white and then e6. It's like sacrificing a pawn to open up the black king even more, take over the e file, and go for the king. Because white's king actually is now surprisingly safe thanks to the file and the line being closed, the diagonal, I should say.
Right, and if you take with the rook, f5 is hanging. If you take with the bishop, like you mentioned, you're bringing in your rook. No, this is actually very scary, Robert.
And he started with rook e1. He's setting it up.
Uh-oh. All right, Hikaru, you got 6 minutes to try to defend this. First of all, also, Dubov has been playing incredibly. Credit to both of them. Queens have been traded. Okay.
This is a bad endgame for black. Look at the pawn structure. This h2 to e5 pawn structure, that's a cemented, protected pass pawn.
A sprinkler.
It's sprinkler, exactly. It's just defended, right? And you can't attack my h2 pawn. There's only if somehow your rook jumps, it transports to h1, teleports, I should say. I just can't get there. Mm-hmm. And so that's the only pawn that can be attacked, whereas the bishop on d3 is always already keeping the bishop on e6 tied down to this f5 pawn. So the black pawn chain is weaker.
Yeah, absolutely. And he plays rook ed2 because he's, putting his rook on the open file. He's preparing for putting pressure on d4. And I mean, he could play for more straightforward, slow plans here, like just moving the bishop out of the way, putting pressure against d4 since it's an isolated pawn. But can Dubov go for anything sharper than that?
He doesn't need to go for anything sharper, so he's just trading pieces now.
Yeah, bishop c4. If it's traded off, there's no way Hikaru can push for a win here unless there's an incredible blunder.
And now d4 is hanging, so you might as well just steal that pawn. I think that Dubov really fended this position off well, and he found e4 at the moment he needed to. He found just the tactical resource that would make his life as easy as possible by taking a little bit of risk.
Right. And, that was one advantage he had because that was a double pawn the entire game. But in close positions, double pawns can actually be useful because they can help break through. Having two pawns on the same file is actually helpful when you cannot move your pawns anymore.
That's right. If that pawn were not doubled and just was in front of another pawn, as you said, you couldn't initiate a pawn break. So it's a really good point, and one that I think is often lost for players who just hate on double pawns and think, oh, it's so bad they can't protect each other. But you can, in some scenarios like this, open up the position, and Dubov did so extremely accurately.
All right. So rook takes c2. Okay, so the moves played very quickly because of the relay. I'll just play them out. So the pieces were traded off here, liquidated. Kings have opposition here. Hikaru is protecting his pawn. Dubov is attacking it. Rook a6. And, Hikaru's rook is tied to a2, so he can't really try to go from behind here because then he's going to lose. So Dubov also just plays it really safe.
Yeah, and the problem is for Hikaru, you'd like to get your rook to c6 and then advance it, but white will always offer a rook trade with rook to c2. And if the rooks come off the board, you just imagine the rooks poof off the board. Black is completely losing because the pawn on d4, like my king will be more advanced. It sounds weird. We can show that afterwards.
Yeah.
Oh, giving up the d4 pawn.
I mean, I'm assuming he. Wait, can he maybe lose this now?
I think he's just trying to go rook c6. He really wants the open file. So even at the cost of a pawn, he's like, I have some potential here.
Some ideas. Yeah, it's a little more risky. He might as well go for it. Because now the white rook is not going to get over to the c file. Unless, if he tries to play something like king d3 and rook c2, I guess after king d3, you have rook c3 check.
Right. That's an important move because otherwise, white does play rook c2. And if you can offer the rook trade and take over the only file that black can use to, go for some sort of plan, then white just is up that protected pass pawn e5.
Well, chat, it seems very likely that we are going to get day 3 tomorrow and that they're going to decide it on the final day. Again, the players in this tournament are all so strong, and it's really never over. And Hikaru was saying this as well yesterday. He has immense respect for Dubov, and similar with Magnus when Magnus won in the first mini match between him and Hikaru, and then Hikaru was able to come back in the last 2 games. You just never know what's going to happen here.
And to me, this is just a role reversal of yesterday because Hikaru won the first game with black, and yes, there were more decisive games yesterday. Here it is Dubov winning with black and then holding the rest of the match. So Dubov should be very happy and proud of himself. And as we've talked about throughout this entire tournament, he hasn't received the attention he deserves, in part because Hikaru versus Magnus, that feels like the grand final. Right. It just happened to be in the semifinals. And now Dubov's here like, hey, don't forget about me, everybody.
We're not forgetting about him. He's grown up so fast from his Netflix debut in Stranger Things. How could anyone forget? He's been in the spotlight for a while now.
Daniil Wilbyers Dubov here is doing well. Where's Winona Ryder? Should we bring her on for some commentary?
That would be awesome, but yeah, unlikely. So Hikaru, he tried one last attempt. If the rook takes, pawn takes, that's winning for Hikaru because he has 1 square to promote, and it would take the king 2 squares to catch up. Unfortunately, his king can't really do anything. Once the rooks are traded, his king always has to be stuck to this pawn that's 3 squares away from promoting. So the king always needs to be 1 square away from getting into the square that I'm also drawing on the board. Lots of squares here, guys. So
that was a cool drawing. I felt like I was in a portal.
Whoa.
I know we were talking about Stranger Things.
Engine eval just went nuts. but I doubt it. I think the engine just doesn't understand the endgame. It's probably still a draw, yeah.
No, I don't think it is. That means king e3 is just a good move.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But after... Oh, is it because we're going to win these queenside pawns?
And Dubov doesn't even want to think about it, so he just pushed the pawn to make a draw.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's no different. Sometimes you of course, if you win the game, that's awesome. But why does Dubov need to think if he can just force a draw?
Yeah, he is here to win the mini match, and with this result, 2.5 to 1.5, it's going to go in favor of Dubov. So the overall result now is 1-1. Tomorrow is the last mini match in the Lindores Abbey Rapid Challenge. Look, on the bright side, we get to see you guys again tomorrow. You know, Hikaru's keeping it interesting. He's putting on a show. And this is also highlighting how strong Dubov is, young, rising